Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We're going to start tonight with some special recognitions, and I believe that the LHS Band Director and Music Department Chair Mike Jones is here and is going to stand in for those principals that are not able to be here. You didn't know that. Come on up, Mike. And I'm going to let you present all of the information to us. So.
Well, my name is Mike Jones, and I'm the band director at Lawrence High School, but I also serve as the executive director of the Northeast Kansas Music Educators Association, so I have the distinct honor and privilege to let everyone know in our district that these four individuals, plus Dr. Dunn, who could be walking in any minute now, have received the Outstanding Teachers of the Year for our district. So I think that deserves a huge round of applause. If you wanted to just you want to go in order here? Johanna first, Jeff? Sure. Yeah, you want to say a few things?
Johanna's the best, and Johanna's a stalwart, has been in our building before some of our staff members were born, and she is the fountain of youth because she has brought along many colleagues around her. She's talked to me about the number of choir teachers and orchestra directors she's had to bring along, but she brings her passion and energy with her every day, and I have flowers for her.
Yeah.
I hate following Jeff, but definitely, we're privileged at Billy Mills to have Forrest Evans. This is his first year with our district and our school, so to have the outstanding music orchestra teacher, then we're privileged, and he does a great job with building relationships with kids, and I guess he knows a few things about orchestra too, so congratulations.
Kristen Ryan, principal at Southwest Middle School, and it's my honor to work with Deb Woodall Rutledge every single day. She's the elementary recipient this year. She has won the secondary recipient as well for the state, so that is quite the honor, both winners in those categories. So if you want to see a teacher teach bell to bell, follow the CI3T plan of handing out positive behavior-specific praise, working hard, and extreme professionalism, it's Deb Woodall Rutledge. So congratulations.
Good evening, Matt Brungart, Principal, Lawrence High School. We are honored to have Dr. Dunn on staff. If you want to know what a good teacher he is, all you have to do is come to one of his concerts. They're amazing what he can get the kids to do. And you think that they're very talented and they're singing, and then you realize, wow, a lot of times they're doing that in a language that's not their native language. And so it just shows how talented he is in all his facets. We were extremely nervous when Kathy Crispino resigned because we didn't think we'd be able to replace him. Or replace her, and then Dr. Dunn came along and we had no problem. In fact, he's taken what she built and taken it to another step because of our three-piece ensembles that he's implemented, which I just slipped me what they're called, but the barbershop quartets. And so with his implementing of the barbershop quartets, he took what she built and took it to another notch. And we're probably extremely special because two of the teachers up here work with our students, because if you didn't know, Joanna works with the Marching Lions in the fall. So congratulations, Joanna. Congratulations, man.
And Howard may also be finding a parking place and coming in. We all love Peter.
I would be happy to speak on Peter's behalf, because all of Peter's hard work at the elementary school comes right into my classroom. He instills a passion for music and a joy of learning in all of his students, and I really respect and admire all the work you do every day in the classroom. So thank you.
Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you. Set the bar pretty high there.
Thanks for everything you do.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
As a mother of somebody who has the privilege of having a kid in Dr. Dunn's choirs and in Mrs. Cox's band, I would just say that I am so thrilled with our music department. It has done wonders for my kids, and so I congratulate you both and thank you for all that you do.
Second.
Yeah, I think most of us have kids in somebody's programs, right? Okay, so welcome back, everybody. We haven't been around for a while. It was December 10th the last time we all saw each other, so I hope everybody had a nice winter break. I don't have a long report today, but I just wanted to touch on a couple things. I was on Hank Booth's radio show the other day, and we were just discussing all things district. He always likes to comment that I'm a local kid. In fact, one time I went back to the office and after a talk on Hank Booth's show, and there was a sign on my door that said, Jessica Beeson, a local kid, by golly. They had read, they'd, listened to the show. But so he'd like to do monthly check-ins, and so if any other board members would like to go on those with me, let me know, and we can just cycle through people, and everybody can have a chance to come talk with Hank. Last Thursday, the Chamber hosted their Legislative Priorities Breakfast, and several of us attended. It was a nice event, and it always allows the City, County Chamber, School District, and KU to share their legislative priorities with members of our delegation. And I wanted to especially thank Shannon for helping me prepare for that meeting. She's our sort of resident, knows everything that's going on with the Kansas legislature, so it was really helpful for me to be able to say, Shannon, help me make sure I don't sound crazy when I'm up there talking about our priorities. So thank you very much. And we're lucky to have such a supportive delegation, too, so I appreciate that we've got that here in Douglas County. Last Friday, I attended the second Lawrence Community Shelter Work Group meeting on behalf of the board. Dr. Stubblefield was also in attendance. The purpose of those meetings is to bring together community partners and really discuss the future of our shelter. It's come on some rough times, and the interim director and the board chair were there. They shared a couple different things that I thought were really positive. They're going to be hiring a consultant to basically do a 360 evaluation, help them with strategic planning, and then help them recruit a new ED. And the city and county leaders that were there were very supportive of that move, and it sounded like they were going to help fund that. So I think that that's a really positive endeavor for our shelter, and we have a lot of families that end up living out there, and so it is definitely an important piece of making sure that there's some sort of maintenance and people have a shelter and roof over their head and food before they come to school. So we'll continue to kind of update you on how those meetings go. And then finally, Shannon, Kelly, and I are going to meet again and start talking about the board manual. We've kind of let that just sit for a little bit while we were doing the search and getting through Dr. Lewis's first year. And so we are going to revisit that and hopefully get a good solid draft out to everybody this spring. And I don't want to put us too tight of a lurch, but hopefully we can get that to you by
calendar spring or Kansas spring. So we've got like a day.
Whatever works best. Yeah. So anyway, with that, I will turn it. Oh, and I also wanted to welcome our student board member today, and I have your name written down somewhere. Yeah. Zach, right? Jax Egan from Free State High School. So thank you and welcome.
Hi.
We're glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Dr. Lewis.
All right, good evening, everyone. It has been a while. There's a lot of exciting things that have happened and definitely a lot of exciting things that are coming up. I also want to welcome Jackson. Thank you for being here. It's a great night to have student representation up here on the board. Also want to welcome Lawrence Journal World reporter, Mackenzie Clark, originally from Lenexa, Kansas, and also a KU grad. She's also had served as a copy editor and a health reporter for 3 years with the Lawrence Journal World. And in addition to covering health and all the wonderful things that are going on in our schools, she will also be writing about the Douglas County Commission. Speaking of Douglas County Commission, I want to congratulate our very own Patrick Kelly, the district's Director of Career and Technical Education and the College and Career Center. He was sworn in this morning at 10 a.m. as the new Douglas County Commissioner this morning. Yes. Congratulations, Patrick. It was great seeing all of our students and staff return this week. I started my week off at Free State High School, wanted to see the new classroom and the students' reactions to the new classrooms. And I will tell you, definitely kudos to our architects and our construction team. Looks like the classrooms were always there. You can't even tell that they were brand new, except when you go inside and see all of the light, the natural light inside those classrooms and the technology that's in there. So it's definitely a value-added addition to Free State High School. Just before the winter break, our Lawrence Schools Foundation announced its receipt of $50,000 gift from Truity Credit Union and its Oaks Education Foundation. I want to publicly thank Truity, who's a valued partner, and its Oaks Education Foundation. We're pleased that portions of the gift will support some of our initiatives that the board heard. One was our Jayhawk Blueprint that provides additional concurrent enrollment for many of our high school students. With this gift, we will be able to provide some scholarships to some students that will want to take advantage of that. In addition, they will help us close some access and opportunity gaps by ensuring that we have a lot of students, underrepresented students, enrolled in our AP classes at our high schools. In addition, Tiny K received a $5,500 donation from the Thomas John Griffin Foundation, which has contributed over $25,000 to Tiny K during the past 6 years. And our thanks to this organization that's led by our former board clerk, Janice Dunn. I also want to publicly thank Cans for Community for its $1,000 donation to support our negative school lunch balances. Congratulations to our Free State Theater for earning the Gold Honor Troop Award and several individual student awards at the state's Thespian Festival. After its selection to perform the show Wait Until Dark, at the state level, Free State Theater also was invited to perform at the International Thespian Festival. So definitely thanks to Erica Waller, Free State's theater director, for our outstanding work with our students at Free State. I want to share some news on some upcoming events. The Lawrence Schools Foundation's Ovation. This is our district-wide talent show. Will take stage actually at 7 p.m. on Sunday night at the Lead Center. This year's show features over 90 middle school and high school performers that were selected by audition. Tickets are available at the Lead Center. On Saturday, the community is invited to the 23rd Annual Caw Valley Eagles Day at Billy Mills Middle School. The district co-sponsors this event each year, which offers a full day of free activities for kids of all ages, and it's from 8:30 to 4. Of course, we have Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday coming up, and with that, there are several events that are taking place. One is the Billy Mills Middle School MLK Assembly, which is 2:15 on this coming Friday. And I'm honored to have been asked to speak to the students and staff at this event. And one that I'm hearing about, I hadn't had the opportunity to attend yet. I was at New York Elementary School today. I understand there's a long-standing annual community MLK chili feed that starts at 5 p.m., and that's 1 week from tomorrow on January 22nd. The public is welcome to come and enjoy a meal together. And of course, the school district's annual One Dream MLK celebration will be held 1 week from this Thursday on January the 24th at Southwest Middle School. A gallery of activities and exhibits open at 5:30 p.m. with a ceremony to follow at 6:30 p.m. The ceremony also includes the presentation of our Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Awards to students, staff, and community members. We hope you all join us for this free and public event. The 12th annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Breakfast is Monday at 7:30 a.m. at Maselli's and features Bob Kendrick, who is the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City, and Vanessa Thomas, a world-renowned soprano. Tickets are available through the Lawrence Ecumenical Fellowship and the Jayhawk Breakfast Rotary Club. Our next school board lunch is at Free State High School on January 22nd at 12 p.m. Advance tickets to next week's Lawrence High versus Free State basketball game is January the 22nd at Allen Fieldhouse and will be available. Those tickets will be available starting tomorrow and through the rest of the week at the Lawrence High School's finance office. Next week, the gates will open approximately 1 hour prior to the start of the girls' game at 6 p.m. The boys play at 7:30. Student activity tickets, those season passes, the gold passes, staff IDs, not even the superintendent's ID will get you in that game. You have to, you have to purchase a a ticket for that game. And this is a big game for us, and we appreciate KU for letting us have our high school share that experience by playing in Allen Fieldhouse. Again, those tickets are available at LHS Finance Office. And finally, I want to end with a quote from the late Tom Brokaw, and he said this: "There is a place in America to take a stand, and it is public education. It is the underpinning of our cultural and political system. It is the great common ground. Public education, after all, is the engine that moves us as a society toward a common destiny. It is in public education that Americans' dreams begins to take shape." And I want to thank this board for taking a stand on public education. School board members, of course, are hugely vital to our public school system and definitely vital to our success here in Lawrence Public Schools. And January is School Board Appreciation Month, or School Board Recognition Month. So it's a great time for us to show our appreciation for these dedicated individuals that I get the opportunity to work with, these individuals that share my same passion. Our board members are, of course, elected by the community here in Lawrence, and we recognize your unique roles, and we value your time spent advocating for quality public education and advocating on behalf of our staff and our students. And it was on January the 16th from 7:30 to 8:30 that I had an opportunity to meet this board this year. I even pulled out my letter that I received saying I had an interview with this board. And so from that moment, I knew that although they were interviewing me, I was also interviewing them as well, because I wanted to make sure I had the opportunity to work with a board that definitely values public education and didn't have any hidden agendas. And so I want to say, as superintendent, thank you so much for the work that you do for our students and staff.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. It sounds like there's a lot going on. Yes. Okay, so next we have Patron Commentary, and the first up is Lucinda Crenshaw. USD 497 Board of Education welcomes patron comments and thanks you for taking the time to talk to us about our policies and procedures. We set aside this time during regular meetings to hear from you. This is the time to share your opinions. However, complaints about specific staff or students will be heard in an executive session to protect the privacy of individuals. While you are not required to share your contact information, we ask that you do so we can follow up with any concerns you have, and please limit your comments to 5 minutes.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, I am Lucinda Crenshaw, and I teach at West Middle School, 7th grade science. And we are here to share with you some things that we are interested in and where we're at this moment, and asking for your input and some information. So being teachers, we want this to be interactive. So please ask us questions, and we'll be asking you so that we can understand. And our topic is Kansas Redesign.
So if I could just pause, this is all three of you are up here right now?
Yes.
Okay, so we also have Lisa Greenwood and Kathy Gates. Okay.
And Redesign is looking at how we do things and how we can better do them. I'll go into a little bit more, but that's why we're up here all together, because we're doing things together and we help each other out. So in our 5 minutes, we might be helping each other remind things.
We could probably give you a few more minutes, too.
We were going for 15, but we're willing to move on that, depending on how much you have for us also. So I came to this a little bit just to give you some background about where I'm coming from and why I think it's important. For the state level, as you probably are aware, I'm not sure how much you are aware, that's another reason we're here, that in 2015, Dr. Watson and Brad Nonswander, some of the people at the state level, went around the state asking communities, they came here to Lawrence also, what it was that Kansans want from public education. What do you want? What do you think we're doing well? What could we do better? And gathered that information that year. Following year, in 2016, I was honored to be able to represent Lawrence as Kansas Teacher of the Year for secondary in Region 2. And so that spring in 2016, I traveled with the finalist team, 8 of us, going around the state, visiting their districts. They came here, being able to talk with potential teachers at colleges that had programs for that, and just really getting outside of my bubble here in Lawrence and being able to see some of those things. So that was also when they first started talking about Kansas Can and some of their dreams. So I was right there when they were first starting to talk about it. And we were very enthusiastic as far as our group is like, this is what we're seeing all over, but there's not any direction or any vision for our whole state. And so that's got me interested. I've been able to represent our district and our state at the national level the following year in 2017 as the NEA Foundation Teacher of Excellence. I was a global fellow. I worked a year on lesson designs and things for going global, and then was able to go to China for 10 days with that group. Again, seeing things that we are doing, talking with people outside of our district, and looking at possibilities to grow as a district. So last year, I completed my national board renewal. I'm one of the first 13 in the state of Kansas that had national board certification. It is only good for 10 years, so then you go through the process again. There is no guarantee you earn it. And so this is my second time of renewal. So I've been 20 years of a certified national teacher, at least in middle childhood generalist. So all that to say that when this fall we got Twitter from KSDE that said their annual conference was coming up, and part of it was going to be about redesign. I was like, I need to get back in this. I'm ready to do something. So I tweeted Dr. Lewis and my principal, Brad Kemp, and I said, who are we sending? And sooner or later, Mr. Kemp came and said, do you want to go? And I said, of course. So I'll let other people tell you, but Lisa also went with that to me. And one of the things that I heard from people that I knew then at the state level is, where's Lawrence on this? And I went, oh. And we're not involved as far as I know as a district. And so based on that, I came back and it's time. It's time for us to be doing something. This is supposed to be teacher-led. It's going to be that it's not something that can be mandated. It doesn't work. It's going to need to be teacher-led, and there are no set answers. There are some processes and procedures that we can talk about and do later, but overall, we're pushing it. I'm ready to start this. So I'm not sure how far, you'll have to keep time on me. I'm not sure how far we are as far as where the information came from and what you know about it, but the main thing that the public said across the state is our school districts here in Kansas are pretty good about the academics. Of course, we can always get better, but we know that you are doing well in academics. What we lack are some of those soft skills that our communities are saying, our businesses are saying, we need people who can show up on time. We need people who are persistent. We need people who know how to problem solve, how to work in a small group, all those kind of things, and more. So time for us to look and say, is that what we're doing? Are we being successful with that? It's also looking at what happens to our students post-secondary. Are they being out of high school? And it might be college, it might be career, but are they being successful? Where are they in 3 to 5 years? Are they contributing to our community? Are we not keeping people here because we don't have that connection? So a lot of questions, which is the other thing this is lots of questions for us to talk about as a community. So we came back. Our principal is being very brave, or we're just overrunning him, I'm not sure which. But he said, what do we need to do? And he's giving us time, every collaboration possible, that we are helping our staff process through this, think about it, those kind of things. We've shared with the middle school scheduling committee. We help them through a process of looking at things. We have presented at middle school professional development, so others middle school staff has kind of talked about this. I've talked to our parent groups, or at least a few of them. We're going to continue on at West. We have presented to elementary principals and middle school principals. We'll do high school principals next week. We also are working with LEA to set up some things. We asked to be able to talk to teaching and learning, and they're allowing us to come and do that. In our future, we would like to be able to talk with our business partner, LEAP, other community things. And on Wednesday, January 23rd at 9 a.m., we are hosting a watch party in our library that the state is putting on a webinar about this next phase. So they'll present information, and then there'll be question answer. So we can talk about needing 80% and board approval and LEA support. We know those things, but we're just trying to keep you in the loop and asking you to join us on this journey. So I think it is now time for me to share for other people.
Hi, I'm Lisa Greenwood. I'm currently serving as the Library Media Specialist at West Middle School, and I was given the opportunity to attend the KSDE annual conference with Lucinda. So I'm here to kind of show you what value you get, I guess, out of the support that you give to teachers when you send us for professional development. I know it's been a couple months, but there was a lot to process, and but here I am. I first heard Dr. Watson speak, I believe it was at our 2017 school year convocation about redesign, and it seemed really exciting, and then nothing happened, no momentum. And then we went to this conference, and it really reminded me of a lot of the questions and the processes that we went through several years ago when we switched from junior high to middle school, with the big driving question being, what is the best for the needs of our students? And you serving on the board shows that you also have that same interest in determining what's best for our students. I had two big takeaways from the conference. One of them was kind of a big aha moment when they talked about, we've for a while talked about what's best for all students, and we need to maybe shift our thinking to instead what's best for each student, because you can hide a lot of sins in the average of all students. So that's a big thing. And know that it's not going to be a cookie-cutter approach to change, that each building has to meet the needs of our families and our students, which are not necessarily always going to be the same in each building. The other big takeaway is that through this process, we need to have a compass. We're not going to have a plan step by step. We may not know all the answers. There are going to be a lot of questions, but as long as we keep that compass in mind, we're going to get there together. And I think Dr. Lewis has certainly set out in his plans some goals to work toward that will be helpful. Right now, as we've been having conversations with our staff, they have a lot of questions, and one question that has come up frequently is, well, where does the board stand on redesign? And as Lucinda said, we would love to hear from you as to what you know about redesign, what your experiences, what your thoughts are. And so I'm here to invite you to become part of that conversation. We are going to be talking to our community, to our parents. So you'll probably be hearing from me, getting personal invitations saying, hey, we're going to have this event in which we're going to be talking to people, and we welcome you to become part of that conversation as we move forward in this process. Those BOE lunches that you have when you come and talk to students in the schools, those are great times to ask questions of students about what they think the ideal school and what's best to meet their needs are. And I'm very glad that you have that opportunity to talk to students. So, next.
Hi, I'm Kathy Gates. I was a learning coach in the district for 11 years, and now I'm back in the classroom. I teach 8th grade ELA at West. And I'm here because I came to the redesign process a little differently. I didn't go to the conference. What I did was serve on the middle school scheduling committee for 3 years. And we were looking at ideas and wondering. And then over the summer, I attended a workshop on project-based learning. And I got the idea that I was going to give the project of middle school scheduling to my students. And so my guided studies classes tackled it. And they quickly learned that if they were going to look at the middle school schedule, they really needed to look at middle school as a whole. And so what started out as how would they change the schedule turned into how would they change middle school. About the same time, I heard Lisa and Lucinda report back about the conference. And so my students started working on what does it take to have a school, and what are the rules, and who says what has to be in a school. They contacted people at the state level. They asked some really hard questions and got really brave. But they learned a lot along the way about what it takes to have a school. And so they by the end of the semester, they had designed their own ideal middle school that met all state standards and had met what they saw as important too. Now, I'm going to say we never talked about logistics. This was 2 groups of 10 to 12 kids that have 10 to 12, 13-year-olds, but it was a start. And so I'm here to say that the kids said many of the things that the teachers are saying about their schools. They asked questions about curriculum. They asked questions about instruction. They asked questions about teaching and what that means and what it means to be learned. And so our students are starting the redesign process as well, and we'd like to invite you to join them. I have 3 of that group that are starting a podcast with what the research that they're doing on school redesign and what they think and their view of what schools need to look like. Jerry, they did their practice recording today. But the students are really interested in this, and I encourage you to join them on this journey.
So before we go, what questions do you have of us, or what things would you like us to find out about? Because we're willing to do some of this work. That's what it's about. So we need to be team players, and we want us to all work together. So anything off the top of your head? Of course, one of us is going to write it down.
Could you tell us the date of your presentation that you mentioned again?
Which one?
You said something about having a presentation at West.
The webinar. Are you talking about the webinar?
The webinar is going to be run by KSDE. It's at 9 o'clock, and we're going to set up the library. We've invited principals. We are inviting parents. So we'll have some of our key kiddos, because I also had a guided studies in their Genius Hour, chose to look into school, and the person she reported to was Jerry Kimmel, and then gave her presentation and had an opportunity to talk. And
what date?
The 23rd.
Okay.
So if we show up for that as board members, that's okay?
Absolutely. Well, also, you guys are community members, so you can wear whatever hat you want to wear. You are parents. So that's important aspect too. But we are glad to, if there are things that you want us to find out about or come back and tell you more about or those kind of things. We live at West.
I'm interested in possibly hearing the podcast at the students.
When they've got it to the point that it's ready for public consumption, we will send it out to you.
one of the schools that is in the process, because there's different stages. There's some that are already just starting. The Mercury schools. Gemini is in the planning era right now. Apollo is coming up, what we would be looking at. But some of those schools, one of the teachers over in Olathe is also doing podcasts about redesign. I believe it's called Moonshot. So there's lots of different things about what they are trying, what other schools are trying, what doesn't work, well, at least at the moment, those kind of things. It would be a brave thing for us to do.
Kelly, did you want to say something?
So it's come up a couple times, this idea about where the board is at on this particular issue. And I know that one of the components of redesign, which was presented to the board and I was reminded of earlier tonight, was the component that 80% of teachers at a building have to sign on essentially to the redesign. And I would want teachers in a building, if 80% of them came to us with a request, to understand that as a board, we would take that very seriously and would very likely support the endeavor.
We appreciate that. We know that LEA is also working on language for possible things that might happen, a little bit of being able to think about how to have that as far as part of the contract. So some flexibility. They are also willing to have that discussion and try to figure it out.
I think that would be my biggest question is what, as you go through this process, what barriers do you identify in structural barriers and the way that we do business that would, I'll just say, the board has heard me talk about school to redesign in my capacity as a board of directors member at KASB. It's something I've heard lots about at that level. I'm super excited that you're so excited about it because it is an amazing opportunity, and so I'm all in for if our teachers want to do this. I think it's fantastic. But that raises the question of what things do we have in place, either through policy or in our master agreement or otherwise, that are barriers to doing that and helping us identify that.
I think and just to kind of go along those lines, what teachers would need from us or educators would need from us to feel some trust that the district would support their endeavors.
And I'll just give a shout out. My kiddo is a student at this school, which makes me even more excited. I have more kiddos that will be students there soon, and he has had both of these teachers, and they are fantastic. So I'm really excited to see you leading the way on this project. So thank you to all three of you.
So I would just end with saying thank you. Last year, I think when this came up, it felt very rushed, and we were really not well informed as a board. And so I appreciate that you're getting kind of a jump start on it, and you're willing to be available for questions and things like that. So I think hopefully this year will be more successful.
Right. We were close last year, but it was what you were saying. It was very rushed. We didn't have enough information. We still don't have answers, but are we willing to look at it and try? That's the question.
Taking a risk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to share any information on the panel that's going to take place on February the 5th at the Lawrence Public Library? It's by LEA.
LEA is organizing a meeting at the library for interested people to come in a public environment to hear about school redesign, to ask the hard questions. And I don't have it's in the evening. I don't have the time in front of me.
5:30 to 6:30.
It just came down.
Yeah, about an hour and a half ago. But yeah, LEA is trying to also create some opportunities that teachers can come and ask questions, but also community members can come and ask questions as well.
Thank you.
So can I ask what is probably a very naive question?
Oh, please, those are the best.
Awesome, fantastic. You'll find you can ask Kathy. I ask these all the time. Usually, Kathy will also tell you that usually my wife stops me.
There is no stopping you. Please ask.
So I hope she's not watching because I'm a dead man if she is. So if the process at the state is for those schools in any of the Mercury or Gemini or Apollo or to do redesign, with no additional staff or no additional funding, why do we need to be included in the process at the state level to do it anyway?
We don't, is the answer. We don't have to be, but if we are, they provide resources for us and people that will come and talk with us and help us guide us through.
Okay.
You don't just, if we voted that this is what we were going to do and you approved and all that, we wouldn't like start all of it in the fall, although some of us would really like to. We would spend a year doing research, a year finalizing what is it really we think we need to do, gather data, look at those kind of things, and they help us through the process in developing, refining a vision that we would have, and then helping us find resources and things. So they come almost every 2 weeks to work with a small group who then hopefully is including the rest of the group on those kind of things, but that's the basic part.
Thank you.
Yeah. I love to be able to know the answer, but there's going to be a lot of times we don't, I don't know, but we'll figure it out together.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to board commentary. Anybody want to go ahead?
I just have something really quick. My mom sent me a text today to let me know that she was reminded by Facebook today that a year ago today, I was sworn in on a board, and she just wanted to let me know that Facebook. She was proud that she could find that out on Facebook. That was the first part of the text, but that she's wanted to remind me of that. So I wanted to tell congratulations to Kelly and to Melissa that we've been doing this for a year, and that I'm saddened that I can no longer claim that I'm a new board member and I don't know anything. I've lost that excuse.
It's over with, buddy.
It is. It's over. It's all downhill from here.
I think I said it like an hour before we got here, really on a phone conversation with someone, so I'll have to put that away now.
Shannon?
A couple quick things. I wanted to thank Educate Lawrence for inviting me on January 3rd to come talk with them about our legislative priorities. They are gearing up to organize and do some advocacy work. I want to thank all the people, parents, and community members that are involved in that to really bring that group back into the fray this legislative session. Had a chance to really talk with them about what is in our priorities and why, and then just some larger picture issues about the history over the last few years with the legislature and with school finance and the Gannon case. So that was actually it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Kelly and I had a policy committee meeting on January 7th, and we mostly went over updates from KASB. We're going to have some policies with some minor tweaks that are going to be coming to the board in the next couple board meetings after this, and probably to continue. There's a number of kind of small things. We haven't come across any real big issues yet, but just small tweaks to improve
Moving
policy.
commas and changing may to more affirmative words. I mean, it's a very tiny changes.
But it's good because it provides us an opportunity to revisit policies that we maybe haven't looked at in a while and make sure that they're still meeting our needs, make sure they're up to date in terms of terminology and all of the things that we do as policy geeks. January 8th, we had a facilities committee meeting and spent most of that meeting going over the capital improvement plan that'll be presented later this evening for the board to consider. So I'm excited about that. I wanted to say good job to Jessica. She did a great job presenting our priorities at the chamber breakfast, and it was interesting to kind of hear the scope of what the city, county, university were asking for. Glad we could be there to advocate for K-12 because really nobody else really had that on their list of priorities. They touched on higher education a lot, and also a lot of other issues related to the tax lid, which really affects the county and the city, K-10 expansion, that sort of thing. So thank you. Also wanted to let the board know that this week, this Wednesday and Thursday, I'm going to be in Topeka for the KASB Advocacy and Action event, which involves an opportunity to take some information over to our legislative delegation about our district. And thank you to Patrick Kelly and Paula Mursh, both for providing me with some information to share, both in that capacity and also with some, on the national level, we're going to have a call talking about the child nutrition program. So Paula has helped prepare me for that, and I really appreciate their input. And again, I just want to say how excited I am to see the teachers here tonight and staff from West advocating about school redesign. It's a huge topic of conversation at the state level, where I'm hearing about it all the time, and I've been anxious for our district to jump into the fray, because I think there's some really amazing things happening, some great flexibility that districts have to try some new things, take some risks, and do things a little differently. And so I'm excited that our staff's excited about it. Thanks.
Sure. Anyone else? Okay.
No, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I received an email, if anyone's watching, that's on the Delta or the Equity Advisory Council, that the meeting has been rescheduled to January 17th as a result of the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. So that would be this Thursday at 5:30 p.m.
And I have a related comment. So I was able to attend the meeting related to the MOU with the Lawrence Police Department. And that was my first meeting with that particular group, and enjoyed the hearing all the thoughtful discourse related to how we create equitable environments within the school district and relationships with our SROs. So I was glad to be there and to learn, and look forward to hearing how that transpires. I also want to acknowledge that the Los Angeles teacher strike is happening in terms of the national conversation of public schools, just to recognize that teachers are out on the streets in the rain, striking for education. And thinking about your quote from Tom Brokaw, that resonated with me, and just wanted to mention that I'm watching it and paying attention to what we can learn from it here.
Okay, so we need to amend consent, tweak it a little bit, and add Kevin Smith to the personnel. Kevin Stewart, sorry, your handwriting is a little hard to read, Dave. Kevin Stewart, who is a Lawrence Free State High School full-time teacher and also football coach, and so we need to amend that. But with that amendment, I move the Board of Education adopt the items listed on the consent agenda.
Second.
Venture?
Yes.
Gordon Ross?
Yes.
Ingram?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Kimball?
Yes.
Beeson?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Okay, so we have our first report is from Kathy Johnson. It's old business, but we're going to talk about the BPEC. What does that mean exactly? So hopefully that'll be the first thing you talk about.
So this is kind of on the agenda because I think Shannon in particular just asked that we kind of bring back a follow-up for some further discussion and maybe direction to the committee about some things. So I do want to open that up first. I do have some suggested thoughts on your focus and timeline because we are upside down on time. Mm-hmm. And there's some kind of hit the road running deadlines and dates that we have to hit that don't allow us maybe some time to do some other things that we maybe would like to do a year from now when we're kind of in a better cycle. So to answer your question, it's the Budget and Program Evaluation Committee. I believe the two board members that have volunteered to serve on it are Melissa and Kelly. So
Shannon has also volunteered. Okay. So we need to kind of have a little discussion about that, but we will get you two board members for sure.
At least two. Possible because we've not been able to schedule a meeting date because I'm also waiting on some final teacher names, which I'm supposed to have by Wednesday. So
we'll talk about it after and then get the names to you. Okay. Yeah.
So that'll be part of it is trying to finish up the committee piece. The purpose I put in here, and I can read it, but in general, it's the purpose is for the, with board direction, obviously, to have this committee participate in the budget development, make sure they understand sound fiscal management of school districts, understand budget assumptions, limitations on funds, and other topics. help with budget considerations, reviewing the budget process, additions and reductions, hearing that kind of information and helping evaluate that to provide some recommendations or some thought behind some of those requests as they come to the board, and to help evaluate spending of resources, current and proposed, so that we can look at efficiencies and effectiveness of those and make sure that both human and financial we're making the most impact to student achievement. So that's just general kind of purpose and thought. Some of the discussion, these were some of the hot areas, I guess. Deficit spending, some of the topics from the listening, learning, some existing committee work. Tentative timeline for a first meeting, the 22nd is apparently out. That's Lawrence High Free State basketball at Allen Fieldhouse. Therefore, we won't try to compete with that. So I would propose that it would be ahead of the 28th board meeting from like 5 to 6:30. At which time we need to decide what that timeline of meetings needs to be, whether it's between board meetings or if it's always going to be ahead of the meeting, understanding everybody has lots of meetings and there needs to be some set aside time all the way through June. So we have to get that on the calendar because we have target times that we have to meet certain things, and we're already behind. So based on some of those things, I guess my first question is, does the 28 work with the 3 board members that would potentially be on the group, so that we can at least start there, get the meeting on the calendar, let everybody know so that we can get that started, so we don't get further behind in process planning. So if that sounds like that's what I'm going to target for, is the 28th. So again, based on board goals, assumptions, and direction of the board, we would review budget considerations, additions, and reductions, related reports around that, recommend any budget considerations, priority kind of thing, and evaluate some programs of existing and new for spending and efficiency. So those were it's just really kind of a recap of some of what we talked about last time. Needing some direction from the board about focus areas and that. I actually have some suggested timeline and some thoughts about that, but I am happy to open that up and then see how that fits into some thoughts that I already had, as well as a timeline and some target dates that we really need to hit if we're going to do things very effectively this year. We are at the mercy of the court. We are not going to see a timeline that changes where we've been. We are going to be backwards on knowing finances again, at least one more year. If the court finally makes a decision and allows us some ability going forward after this year, then that will really help this group as well as everybody else in the planning process. But again, we're behind the 8 ball right now. We are upside down on time, and we are still at the mercy of the court. And so it's going to be very difficult because we are going to have to make decisions with a lot of unknowns. So I will open that up for what kind of discussion you might want to do, and then kind of show you a kind of a tentative timeline, target dates of some things that may work.
I mean, unless somebody has questions, I think it's a good place to start would be for you to start with your timeline and us to kind of ask questions as we go through, rather than us arbitrarily telling you a timeline.
And I'm fine with the timeline piece. Yeah, I can, because of the dates, but I didn't know if there's any specific things that are just on the top of your head, or do you want to hear what I'm thinking, and then we can go from there? I can do it either way.
Let's hear what you're thinking.
Kind of your moment.
Can I ask a quick question? So with the approval of, we've already approved this committee, so we just, so you've got, and I really appreciate the extra work to put together a more well-defined purpose. Just to be clear, this would be considered a standing board committee under our board policy. So whatever, I guess, documentation we have about the creation of the committee, we should distinguish that it's a standing instead of a temporary or an ad hoc committee, because it's, we're trying to clean up. We've been talking about trying to clean up the stuff surrounding that policy. So that would be helpful.
Yeah, as we get started, and really kind of after this year, it'll more dovetail with your strategic plan and just sort of an ongoing timeline and structure. But like I said, we're kind of behind the curve right now. So kind of just need to jump in with both feet and try to accomplish a few things. So I can flip up a timeline and start talking that direction if you want to. Okay, so a couple of things before I do that, and then I'll fit them into the timeline. There's a few things that right off the top we know we still have deficit spending. So understanding school finance and school district budget details is right off the top. We have to understand that as a committee and understand what the deficit spending looks like, and then talk about, addressing that in the scope of looking forward. The second thing that is always time unfortunate before you know anything is deciding on staffing ratios. And so there is some hiring dates of preference, and we're already wanting to hire and we don't know the information. So just the whole idea of how do we staff, what does that look like? What if we went status quo, what does that look like? And what are some of those budget decisions that are around that? Tied to that are some things that you approved last year that probably need some program evaluation as a result of. We chose to do 3 guidance counselors and reduce staffing contingency for elementary. There were hot spots. How does that look holistically? Did those dollars you targeted to guidance, to put full-time guidance counselors, so that program evaluation of the impact of what that decision was last year, some feedback on that would be helpful in just the scope of where we are today, how it impacted elementary schools to have a full-time counselor when they didn't before, and the whole idea that it did reduce contingency. It did create some 3 less FTE that you could work with, and so how does that fit into the picture of your budget decision making for 1920? Do we need to add back the contingency, some of those? So that's sort of a piece of a program evaluation that I think off the top and ties with staffing decision that has to happen early. The high school also chose to take 2 FTE from their ratios and put them into general fund social workers instead of classroom teachers. Again, a little bit of a program evaluation, or at least some feedback of what that impact was to the high schools in lieu of a staff member in a classroom, and how does that look, and where does that fit into the scope of things. The other one, although it wasn't something where we reduced a ratio, it was something that we added new dollars towards, and that was your intervention specialist at the middle school, and adding dollars to that type of position versus maybe a staffing position probably takes some feedback. And the only reason I picked those 3 is because they really do tie to staffing decisions as far as classroom or otherwise. And so we can't do everything. There are a lot of others, I'm sure, that if we started making a laundry list, we would like to focus on, but timing of dollars and staffing and where we're going to put some money off the top because you're staffing and making sure those class sizes are what you want them to be is kind of an off-the-top expense that we always need to talk about, and HR would like permission to hire as soon as possible, and so that all falls into that time frame. So I kind of preface that because I tried to fit those kinds of things in the timeline, knowing that there's other things we're going to have to fit in, and knowing we don't have all day to meet every time we meet, so we're going to have to kind of focus on where we target some time. So that being said, the tentative timeline kind of thing, and I don't know if I can make this bigger if it's helpful. I took off the 22nd because that's really not an option, so we're going to talk about meeting on the 28th. So I put board meeting dates in here as well, and I can circle this back around, but the timing of what I know as information. We will know January, we'll meet on the 28th, and the very first topic is just the introduction and getting some understanding of school finance and kind of really this timeline, getting meetings scheduled, some of those things. The 28th is a board meeting. The 31st should be our exit for KSDE audit. As you recall, what our FTE enrollment is on 9/20 of 18 that they're auditing right now will be the core and base for our funding next year. That will help, because if we didn't grow, if we lost, so at least that and statutory-based state aid, that's our starting point. We'll know at least a chunk of our dollars. What we won't know is what the state Supreme Court tells us inflationary dollars might be. So we can kind of guess based on some recommendations out there. We'll be able to use that then as a basis for, okay, if we're thinking going forward and these are the things off the top, how are we going to divvy, we can start that process of prioritizing some of that. But at least we can get some of that out there after the 31st. So we'll establish the 2 meetings in February. I would suspect that right after the first one about school finance and some of our introductions and some of the the housekeeping things. We'll dive right into the details of the USD 497 budget. And what do we do, and how do we spend it, and how does that translate to what the state is in as line item detail as we need to help us understand, which won't maybe get done on the first meeting, but dovetails into the second, and that's deficit spending and staffing ratios, because that is the chunk of our budget is staff. So those first two meetings in February, after we kind of get the overview of school finance and the need to be focused on that level of detail. There is no first board meeting in March, and we probably need to schedule one of these meetings, even though we don't have two board meetings, because we need to find out what additional information we didn't get done in those first two, and what other questions came out of that in order to further talk about the guidance counselor evaluation at the second board meeting or the second meeting in March, and recommendations that we might come to with staffing and ratio and contingency, because by April 8th, which is actually later than HR would like, we need to give them some guidance of what they can do for hiring, because we are outside and starting to get at the bottom end of the hiring season as far as what's available. I don't know how to push this a whole lot faster because we are upside down on time. If we can, you know, we could try, but it's a lot of information to, one, understand, and two, to feel like we actually evaluate it in a fashion that dovetails with what we have available for dollars, because this is going to come off the top. What's decided for staffing and what permissions they have to go ahead and hire is off the top of any new dollars that we have, and we know that. So that gets us into April, and from there we're just continuing to evaluate budget considerations, deficit spending, what the legislature's doing, and those other kinds of things, and that will just follow our way through. Details of what those future meetings would be. But the part that I wanted to point out is we don't have a whole lot of time between when HR needs to know and you ultimately need to commit some dollars off the top of what are known new monies and potential inflationary dollars. And that is what it is. And some of the enrollment may not change as a total, but as you know, section, especially at elementary, it might mean that a section is different or a school is different in a way that what was base for FTE last year may not be base for FTE this year. And then where those hotspots and contingency things need to be. So this is sort of a proposed kind of timeline structure and some of your very first things that you need to make decisions on. So I open that up for, is that the track you want to follow? Do you have something else in mind? But those are always the first few things right out of the chute that we have to decide for budget purposes as a board and just as administration as to how we're going to make. One, we've got to deal with deficit, and two, we've got to make some staffing. Doesn't mean that it's permanent, that, you know, maybe that's the minimum of what you give them permission to hire. We evaluate that further and then give them additional permission or change in contingency as we follow what enrollment does as they get kindergarten roundup numbers. And doesn't mean you're done talking about it. It just means we have to kind of give them that initial permission. Maybe after roundup, we have to revisit it to see where those kindergartners all of a sudden grew that we didn't have any idea that they were there in the RSP projections.
Well, first of all, thank you for putting this together. I think it is a nice outline to kind of keep the group moving forward. And I really like that you have program evaluation in there. I think that's an important piece, and I don't think we've historically been great about at least doing that publicly. So I do appreciate that in there. Does anybody have questions or things they think need to be added?
I did want to talk about the program evaluation. I mentioned this last time. And I mean, clearly the outline here is there's a lot of heavy emphasis on budget, which is appropriate. And I was reassured by the superintendent last time that this won't be a problem, but I want to make sure that program evaluation piece doesn't get lost in here. I mean, if you look at the purpose, it's really buried a little bit in the third paragraph when we talk about the efficiency and effectiveness to ensure resources, yada, yada, yada. So just a plug to remember that that's an important part of this as well.
Yeah, and that's we've been having those conversations. As Kathy mentioned, there are some things that the board has already approved with the counselors, the interventions at the middle school. We will be evaluating if it's, you know, what's the impact. If there's no impact, then why are we, you know, continuing to do it? And so that's something that I'm hugely excited about the opportunity to really evaluate what we're doing.
And it'll be really important that we continue to do that even on existing programs, not just recently added things, because as you think about redesign and you think about how staffing needs to look different in redesign, that needs to be part of how you evaluate some of that programming and some of those staffing pieces, because this is just kind of status quo. We're behind the curveball. We have to do something for next year, but as you continue to evaluate, whether it's through the late start, whether it's through redesign, whatever it is, there's going to be budget impacts to every one of those things, and using this committee to help vet through some of those and ask questions and just kind of work through the process, not only with recommendations for budget, but also then a year later, did it do what we intended it to? And can we use this committee and the expertise, because it is broad spectrum of administration, teachers, classified, and just, you know, what is that input and feedback? And hopefully that will get us smarter and better, and will grow and improve as we move through using them and using a process to just do things instead of just kind of off the top sometimes.
Are there any committee spots, community spots is what I mean on this, outside of certified,
On the
classified?
actual core committee, there's not community, but as you would do things, there would be, so what I would envision for suggestions for, like, if you do program evaluation for the elementary, that it should be somebody from the budget committee, but then you start pulling in people that aren't on the committee but are elementary, and particularly in the buildings that got the full-time counselor versus a building that might already have one, and really should involve a parent with that process or a teacher from that building.
Okay.
And so those subcommittees that would help gather some of that feedback on that evaluation should then help with the report back to this committee, and then help us to be able to report back to the board as a whole as to what we learned and their feedback as a part of that. And so elementary can do that, the middle, the high, they each can kind of break off, do some of that work separately, and then bring it back together. So I would hope that we would be able to involve community that way and get that feedback on those specific topics as we work through.
I think given the short timeline and the posture in which we still sit with respect to the finance case and state funding, and I think that this is it's an aggressive schedule, but it's I think about the most that we could anticipate asking a group like this to do in such a short timeline. So I'm very comfortable with the direction.
And, you know, as feedback or as thoughts, you know, if we can't do something through this year's process, that doesn't mean that we can't work it in or figure out how it needs to grow or change or, you know, better protocols and things. We're just kind of having to dive in, start swimming, and then build the boat a little bit as we go. So we'll work.
Okay.
We have to start somewhere, so.
Thank you, Kathy.
That work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, so we will move on to our first report under 2019-2020 calendar. Yay.
I'm Jill Anderson, early childhood at Kennedy.
Jeannie Friedel, Woodlawn Elementary Principal. So Jill and I, as co-chairs of the calendar committee, met twice face-to-face with our committee in December, and then through several emails as well to draft a 2019 to 2020 calendar for you. As you know, this year we onboarded staff with 2 district PD days in August to allow a full day for our Power School training. But as we were gathering input from teaching and learning representatives as well as LEA representatives, we agreed that having the district professional days for certified staff spread throughout the year would be a better idea for this year. So on the calendar you will see excuse me, one in the fall and one in the spring. As in the past, the student days out of school, we have tried really hard to align them with elementary, middle, and high school as much as possible, including those 3 elementary plan days that we have. And as requested, given community input for consistency, kindergartners will begin on the same day as grades 1 through 5, with flexibility for class assignments given that first week of school. So those are kind of in a nutshell the major things that we looked at within all the other parameters that we included for you in your packet. Do you have any questions about the draft calendar?
Just because I'm new to this, if you could sum it up for me, I appreciate the fact that you tried to line up those days off. What are some of the things that prevent you from being able to line those days off between the elementary, the middle, and the high school? I'm just curious.
Well, I think they are, except when we have additional days for either one level or another.
Okay. All right.
The main thing is elementary's on trimesters.
Okay.
Secondary's on 9 weeks.
Okay.
And semesters. So that kind of changes some of the number of days as we try to even those out. Secondary really likes to have as close as much as they can to first semester as second semester for planning. So we work from there and then work our way backwards, forwards, however you want to look at it that way. But that's kind of how we start.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit more about the flexibility of enrollment? And I only ask this just because we did hear from some people, I think different buildings handled it differently when kids would come to school and they would be in this classroom or they weren't announced and they'd be moved around. So can you just maybe talk through it a little bit, and then if we have any guidance on maybe how our elementary buildings are going to communicate that to parents?
Well, that is still a discussion point for elementary principals yet. This spring, we're still going to discuss further some of those things that we need to do to have consistency throughout our buildings. But the main thing was that, kindergarten did not come that first day of school. And then each school kind of had a different way of onboarding their kindergartners on Thursday and Friday. And half of them came one day, half of them the other day. That was personal opinion, that was kind of nice that we had only half at a time to get them through the lunch routine, etc. But I do understand that the community would like that consistency with having all students there at the same time. So from day one, we'll have kindergarten there full days.
Okay.
I think this is the most well-aligned version of the schedule that we've had over the many number of years, and I appreciate the work that you've put into it to do that. Because when you do have kids at multiple levels, it does help a lot to have those things aligned. We still have lots of Fridays that we're out of school, and so I hope one of the things we can talk about in strategic planning is whether there are ways to expand our community partnerships to help parents with programming for those days that we have out. I think it's really great that we do that because I know it's really important for our staff. So I wouldn't want to change that. I just seeing ways that we can balance that on both sides. So thank you. And thank you. I understand this will be the last time that we see you for this. And
push that. I'm not saying it's the last.
We may be bringing the draft next
year
before May, so it can be done. We were sitting back there. We were talking. I said, "Have we done this together for 10 years?" Oh my God! And
you've done it together for all the 8 years that I've been on the board. So thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that conversation actually reminded Melissa and I that when we were going through consent, we forgot to do retirements, announce retirements. We have a couple really important ones, so we want to do that real quick. Oh, okay. So and we also need to do a motion on the calendar. So we'll do that first, so we can complete that order of business, and then we need to recognize our retirees. So do I have a motion on the calendar?
I move that the draft calendar for the 2019-2020 school year be adopted as proposed.
Second.
Johnson?
Yes.
Fincher?
Yes.
Gordon Ross?
Yes.
Ingram?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Kimball?
Yes.
Beeson?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Okay.
Okay, so the board would like to recognize the following retirements. Terry McEwen for 17 years of service. Howard Dicon, 7 years. Jean Fidel, 13 years. Charlotte Anderson, 28. Paula Barr, 24. Denise Hobbs, 40. Jay Hundley, 21. Arla Jones, 22 years. Brenda Myers, 35 years. Mary Pendry, 29. Cheryl Simmons, 21 years. Christine Valchik. Valsich. Oh, 25 years. Jack Rigo. Yes, 20 years. Carol Tingle, 20 years. Oh, some of them are duplicates. So the board would like to express our sincere appreciation for your years of service and devotion to the community and its schools. So thank you.
Okay. Next up is our high school start time presentation with Dr. Anna Stubblefield.
Good evening. Christina Holt is actually going to join me.
Okay. Welcome, Christina.
She's actually doing the bulk of it. But good evening and Happy New Year, and thank you for your service. Christina Holt facilitated the high school start time committee, and I just want to publicly say thank you to I think it was 30 of us on that committee. We were all together maybe once or twice, but people participated via Zoom and through email. So there are committee members here tonight, and I just want to thank our board members, our parents, our community members, our teachers, and everyone who participated and was open to the dialogue with the discussion. We did have a couple of community partners that also provided valuable input. First Student, as well as Boys and Girls Club, that helped us through this process. So I'm going to turn it over to Christina, and I'm here to chime in, and she'll start just giving some of the background from the variety of ways that we got input to come to our recommendation.
Good evening. The USD 497 created an advisory committee to research and study the issue of shifting high school start and dismissal times and to provide a recommendation to the school board. Because a change in high school start and end times could impact a number of areas for students, families, and staff, the district engaged the University of Kansas Center for Community Health and Development to conduct focus groups to gather input from students, families, and staff, and engaged patron insights in surveying school staff, students, and parents. A total of 11 focus groups were conducted in October and November of 2018, including focus groups with teachers, staff, students, and parents from Lawrence High and Free State High School, as well as focus groups with the Equity Advisory Council and the Delta Parents of Color. I will share with you some highlights of the survey and focus group feedback. The largest proportion of students were in favor of a later start time. Benefits that students noted included more time for sleep, less stress in the mornings, and more time to get ready in the morning and finish homework. The buses wouldn't have to come so early. Improved mood, not being as tired and being more able to focus in class, better attendance, and more time for a better breakfast. 36% of students did prefer no change, and concerns noted by students included getting home later from practices, games, or after-school activities, potentially missing more school at the end of the day when leaving for games, less time for homework in the evening, and transportation to school if they get their ride from parents who maybe have to be at work early. So there are a couple of quotes here on this slide that were gathered during focus groups, and these particular quotes were from students who had been identified as at risk for not graduating. In terms of parent feedback, the largest proportion of parents were in favor of a later start time, with benefits noted including more adequate sleep time and that teenagers need more sleep, Also, that teenagers naturally stay up later, that their circadian rhythm makes it harder for them to wind down in the evening, so a later start time more naturally fits their flow. And not being so hard for the kids to wake up in the morning. Better mental health outcomes and improved mood. More time in the morning, less stressed and rushed. And improved academic achievement and attendance. 42% of parents surveyed suggested no change, with concerns including potential work schedule conflicts with getting children to school later, potentially challenging for some parents who commute, the concern that students may go to bed later if they know they can wake up later, the concern that activities could run later, and potentially missing more school due to games. And you see here some illustrative quotes from parents. It was hard to select the quotes because there's lots of feedback that has been gathered and shared, but these are kind of illustrative of some of the feedback that we heard. Next. And of all the groups, staff were the most concerned about a potential change, with 51% of staff surveyed suggesting no change and 37% suggesting a later start time. Staff did note a number of potential benefits, including more sleep. Students may be better rested and better prepared for the first classes of the day. It can be hard for some students to take rigorous classes first thing in the morning. Some students do not function well early in the morning, and some teachers are not morning people either. Staff also shared a number of concerns, including loss of class time due to away games, a fear that there would be pressure to extend the teacher duty day and getting home later in the evening, activities potentially just shifting everything later, feedback that it could affect schedules of teachers who work more than one job, the cost of covering classes due to activities, potential conflicts with availability to students, potential personal childcare costs for after-school childcare, and implementation potentially coinciding with other large changes and requests being made of teachers. So, for example, Power School and construction renovations. Across groups overall, most of those consulted were in favor of a later start time. However, a number of considerations did come up repeatedly. A number of suggestions that we heard multiple times included looking into a later start time, but keeping the end time of school the same and looking at adding school days onto the calendar. Looking into transportation options for those students who rely on parents to get them to school and whose parents must leave for work very early. There are some students who do not meet the transportation requirement for a bus, but they live too far to walk. And many recommended that a more systemic redesign is needed and that should be done in conjunction with changing school start time. And then the hesitancy of staff, especially, to make another change concurrent with other large changes and demands on staff. And this quote is one of the committee members said, "I really believe the data shows a need to study a variety of start times to meet the needs of our diverse population of students and staff. The feedback is across the board. Some families and staff need an earlier day starting at 7 or 7:30, while others could benefit from the later start times and additional sleep. While I personally believe we should make the change to a later start now, the data seems to point us to continue to look further into offering a staggered option." So based upon the 6 months of research, information gathering, and study done by the High School Start Time Advisory Committee, the committee has come up with the following recommendation. We, the High School Start Time Advisory Committee, affirm the benefits of a later start time. Recognizing the community is calling for an array of options to meet their needs, we recommend a committee continues to meet starting now to look at broader issues, including but not limited to a staggered start time, redesign, a later start time but not later ending time, and an extended school year, seminar, with implementation in August 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And I also want to thank all of the committee members that spent their time doing this, because I know that you met several times, and I know that sometimes the conversations were tense, I'll say, as they always are in this type of work. So thank you for that, and thank you for your work as well. Are there any thoughts, questions for Christina or Dr. Stubblefield?
So
Go ahead, Melissa.
With the advisory committee, did they look into it potentially, like as far as the start time but not ending time, or was that something that they kind of proposed as a result, or did they briefly look into it?
I think the committee. Oh, you want to speak, Jill?
Oh, no, you can go ahead and speak.
There were a lot of things that came up that as a committee we determined was outside of our scope, but we listed them as consideration. There was conversation around that. We did share the presentation that the student brought forth the last time with the entire committee. There was lots of feedback given to the committee, but we did not spend a lot of time like trying to work on solutions because we were trying to stay focused, but there was lots of dialogue at different times around lots of options. And so part of that we would have to work through and work with the state to make sure we're meeting the requirements of the 1,118 hours. Just to see what creative ways, which is where the redesign and some other things came about, that we can meet that in, without extending the day.
And I think leading up to this, really, the committee was, I couldn't tell you what proportion. It was a split feelings about should we change the start time to a later time or leave it the way it is. And I don't know what the proportion would you guess what it would be, but I think this was the compromise. And as you remember, the presentation that the student came to present to us also kind of had a solution of adding an hour or making the schedule more flexible. I can't recall what it was, but I think that might have been also kind of a model or maybe a solution to there were people that felt that there were some barriers in carrying out a later start time, and that this would be a solution to solve some of those barriers. Some of them were, I think you mentioned a lot of them. There were equity concerns or or parent transportation return issues. People who commute, and then also restrictions on the other end of the day, which would be conflicts with activities, et cetera. So I think this, my understanding is this kind of came out as a compromise, maybe.
Can I, to that end, just talking about the committee's scope. So the charge to the committee was really to find whether there were benefits associated with a later start time, and if there were components of the later start time that we weren't considering, hardships that maybe would outweigh what we know the evidence suggests in literature. And so for me, the trouble with the recommendation is it really, the question of, is a later start time a benefit to health outcomes, potentially to educational outcomes, and not to take away that there might be some hardships, particularly for athletes, but that overall there was the data suggests the majority of students and parents either endorse the change or they're neutral, meaning they didn't identify significant harm that would preclude a later start time. And so when we look at incorporating in redesign, seminar, that it's not that I don't want to look at those things. I do want to look at those things. I'm just not sure that where we're at, based on the work that you've done, would suggest that we would continue with this committee. For me, or an advisory committee related to time. So what I would like is some clarification, because the direction, as I look at this information, suggests that a later start time is in the best benefit of children and of students. So would the committee that you're proposing be made up primarily of administrators who would be tasked with identifying how we make a later start time work, which is different than we're going to examine, all these other things that really could be related to start time, but might be well outside of start time considerations like redesign and seminar.
Yeah, that's well. I would agree. There's definitely a different scope. Really, I think this was a consensus building thing, possibly, because there were definitely.
And if I could speak to that just a little bit, we were trying really hard to provide those three options of staying the same, or 8:30, or 9 o'clock, and so where this came from is we were hearing in a lot of the almost every focus group participants were saying, it would be really nice if we could have choice. It would be really nice if we could look at this not in a vacuum. It would be really great if we could also be looking at that this is a Band-Aid and that there's a much bigger picture that needs to be looked at. And so we kind of ended up, earlier in the process, we had said it's outside of our scope, but towards the end of the process, the group ended up feeling like we can't make these changes in isolation. So.
I mean, I guess the thing, I think that I'm thinking about redesign, the teachers that we had come to us from West earlier today and talking to us about, there are these moments when you identify innovation which evidence suggests is in the best interest of students, and there are these other things when you are evaluating that you discover might also be exciting things to undertake, and that there is a component of unknown as you make changes that are significant to the district. I'm concerned that if we create a committee with such broad scope, that we will move away from moving the school start time either 30 minutes or an hour. I'm also not hearing the component of the cost, the budgetary considerations doesn't seem to be weighed in any of the reports that I've seen.
We did look at one layer of cost, which was transportation, because and so an 8:30 start time would cost approximately $240,000 to $250,000. A 9 o'clock start time would have a potential savings of $240,000 to $250,000. If you were to do a stagger start, 8 and 9, it would cost about, and provide bus routes for both, it would cost about $50,000, if I remember right. So the committee, we were aware of that, but what we did try to hold true to was not let cost be a driving force when we were looking at the research. But that, we do have the information from First Student. They did provide it in regards to cost, and I can definitely forward those emails to Elise so you guys can have them. And they were a part of some of the minutes. I think the minutes are posted somewhere, but I can get it to you directly. In regards to, and I completely hear what you were saying, and that was something that the committee grappled with, is isolating start time from those other things. But what we found was that there are domino effects, and we did talk at one point about layering, like once you have an idea, you may layer it in. So some of the things, absolutely, you can probably do in isolation, but some of the things, when we think about our current master agreement, we could not structurally change today without engaging in some of those conversations, because it changes the agreement. So as far as, unless you just pushed it back and did not address some of the considerations that came up. But there are some language, I mean, there are language barriers for shifting the start time. Absolutely, it is. I'm looking at Lori, but there are some language challenges, if right. And then there were some things that staffing-wise, we don't know currently what the impact would be because we didn't look as that as a committee. So right now we run a 0 hour at 7, and if we have a huge enrollment in 0 hour, then we'll have to shift staff. Does that mean we're going to have to add more staff? If we had an 8:30 start now, 0 hours is 7:30, and if our 0 hour enrollment triples or doubles, and those kids still stay throughout the day, how would that impact staffing later in the day? Those were some of the things that directly impact that we would have to look at.
That to me is next level conversation that administrators should be looking at. So for me, what I would want to see as you look at this committee is that we're moving away from, which I think this is an important step, the community conversation to really evaluate. I remember, Jill, when we started looking at this, you made some really astute observations about how this will impact, families that might have some restrictions in their homes, in their home life if we make this change. And this step in terms of looking at that, we certainly discovered that there may be some challenges, but overall there is a significant benefit. So now that we've identified what those challenges are, either through what we need to do with the contract, with the teacher negotiation component, what we need to do with scheduling, what we need to do with transportation, those are next level administrative conversations. So if you needed to take a year to figure that piece out, that would make sense to me. But looking at it, a continued conversation about whether or not we should do it is a little more.
So I guess if I can just say a couple things, because we have a student board member who wants to weigh in, and I want to give him that opportunity. But also, I actually read this as a very hopeful statement that we have basically identified that we want to do this, but we need more time. And one of my largest concerns with this in the beginning was that we were trying to rush this on a timeline that was way too fast for us to be able to implement it in this coming fall. And I also don't want to lose sight of the fact that we have teachers on, so students and parents were, weighed on the side of doing it right now, and teachers have a little bit of trepidation about that, and that actually speaks volumes to me that we do need to take this time. So what I understand, and we could definitely finesse this wording to better articulate what you're saying, where that we really want to move towards this, we're supportive of that, and now we want to spend the next year really thinking about the logistics of the administrative side of it. But what I wouldn't want to do is have a group come together collectively, work as hard as they did, give us a recommendation, and for us to sort of say, you really didn't do a good enough job for us, and we don't like your recommendation.
That's not what I'm saying.
And this really probably encapsulated the two different sides to come to a compromise. I mean, I understand that you're concerned that it's maybe not policy, but it shouldn't be that detailed, but in order,
broad.
It's kind of where the group was right before it was past our deadline to finish, and so it was. Obviously, there's some things to study, but.
So I just want to clarify, I was not dismissing the work of the committee, nor the work that they've done or the time they've put into it or the research they provided. The research they provided has led me to the conclusion that a later start time is in the best interest of the district. So given that, my question is, how do we help what we learned from the committee's data be put into action? And I'm suggesting that this recommendation, as it's written, is too broad for the district to make next step decisions to get us to that space. So if now we need to look at this more deeply in terms of how we organize our scheduling, how we organize administrations. What are the considerations that a community member couldn't look at, but we would need a principal to give us feedback on, that we would need teachers to tell
agree,
us?
Kelly, and that's how I read this,
And
is
that's
saying that
how I
exact
read
thing, right? That we're going to spend the next year really digging into the details.
That's why I'm asking for some change in the way that it's written.
You can
It's too
definitely
broad.
tweak that. And before we go to Rick, I'd really like to give our student a chance.
I think I'm before Rick.
And yes, and Shannon's also had her hand up.
Thanks.
Yeah, so as a representation of the students, I think when you look at the options you presented in your recommendation, I think a staggered start time would definitely be the most popular among students. A lot of people I know, myself included, take a 0 hour, like you guys mentioned, and that's popular amongst athletes in particular because they get to go home before practice or something like that, and just people have their personal preferences for what works best for them. But I think if you were to, like you guys were talking about, potentially adding another hour at the end, like an 8th hour for the high school schedule, I think that would be popular. Students could start 2nd hour and go maybe 9 o'clock to 4 o'clock, whatever it may be. But high school students, they really like having that choice to do what they want and what works best for their schedule. Of course, logistics would be an issue with staffing and stuff like that, but I think that would be the best option in terms of what would be most popular among students.
Thank you. Thank you. Shannon?
So I think this all really is a really interesting conversation. I wanted to use a moment to point out that although we've talked a lot about kind of students, and you sort of mentioned this, Jessica, students and parents being slightly more on board with this than not on board with it. When I was looking at that survey data, I was really struck by some of the things that the staff said in terms of the impact on them, and I don't want to lose sight of that because we talk a lot about wanting to make sure that we are respecting their views and opinions about the direction that we're taking. And for instance, one of the things that really stood out to me was that number of staff who said that they do have second jobs to make their lives as teachers doable. The vast majority of them said they would be negatively impacted, possibly not be able to maintain that second job.
Or continue to work in our district.
Or continue to work in our district because they couldn't continue to have that second job. And I think that's a really important piece of this, which makes me supportive of this recommendation, sense of we need to not rush into this. We need to think about some of these other options and how can we think creatively about if we think there's a portion of our students who could really benefit from a later start time, how can we do that without damaging the lives and livelihoods of our staff? So, I do have a question as to how logistically we're going to take this forward now, and maybe that is more of a discussion. If the board is generally in favor of accepting this recommendation, then a follow-up from staff about, okay, what do you propose that we do as our next steps, and how does that look in alignment with the strategic planning process? And the final question I had in that same vein was, we heard from the middle school teachers who are looking at redesign. What work, Dr. Lewis, do you know about, if any, that's going on at the high school level around redesign that's being staff-driven? Or even building leadership-driven? Are they looking at participating in the Kansas Redesign Project in the same way that the middle school is, or is that really, when we're talking about redesign in this recommendation, are they talking about it outside the scope of the Apollo project?
Yeah, they are having those conversations along with the Apollo project in terms of what would a high school redesign look like. So it's not a separate redesign other than what the state is advocating for.
Are either of the two high schools at a place where they think they're going to put this to a vote of their faculty to participate in that this year, or this coming year?
I know Free State is seriously thinking about it. I'm not sure about Lawrence High. Rick?
No.
Free State administration is expressing a lot of interest last year and this year.
Yeah.
Not as much interest or discussion at LHS at this time anyway.
Okay. In terms of the barriers, Dr. Stubblefield, that you mentioned with the the contract, are those barriers to some sort of form of this, of a shift that would be something beyond just shifting the whole day, half an hour or 60 minutes? Is that really where the barriers come in, to say, like, if you were really seriously going to look at extending the school, adding days to the school year, or?
So that's where we would run into contract issues.
Okay.
If we, right now, the contract is 186 days. If we're saying we're going to add 10 days, we have
That has to be negotiated through the negotiated agreement.
And then,
those are budget implications.
yeah, and there are budget implications there as well. And even if, if the compromise was a staggered start, we know that about 38% of the staff was interested in a later start. So working out those kind of kinks to say, if you had the option of working from 8 to 3 or 9 to 4, figuring out who it is and making sure you have enough math offerings, science offerings, those kind of things, those things take time. If you shifted, if you just decided, if you guys were going to vote today and say we're going to have an 8:30 start and we're just going to push it back, I mean, we just would have to work through those things, like if now 0 hour is 7:30 and more students enroll in a 0 hour, and if we don't have enough staffing to accommodate we didn't get into that. That is a lot of administration, which, we didn't recommend that the committee in its current form continue. We were saying a committee. Definitely we'll still have to have administration and teacher representation, and then figure out how to engage parents and community partners in some of those barriers that directly impact them to problem solve.
Okay. I'm done.
And we're also going to
Thank you.
be tearing up Lawrence High all next year as well.
All of the next 3 years.
Yeah, so
Right.
I mean, it's something else to keep in mind when we're thinking about stressing out our entire staff.
In addition to the city tearing up the street right outside of Lawrence High,
Yeah.
starting potentially later this year.
Rick?
So I have two comments. One with regard to this recommendation, and one with regard to the issue of rushing this. So I agree, and I agreed in the committee meeting that many of these things are very good. But, to think that we're going to have meet on these issues, have some consensus, I think is probably misguided. I think the other part of this is that if you look at some of these things, extending the school year, you're going to run into a lot of controversy. And I mean, that's fine. If there's something that's controversial, but it's in the best interests of students, we should do it. But you're going to need time to actually build support for those controversial issues. So my fear is that we'll wind up here next year with exactly the same issue. But let me talk to about the notion of rushing this, and if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, because I think it's important to look at kind of where we started and where we are. I'm looking at the board goals for 2005. In September, we put on the board goals, investigate the impact of adjusting school start times, almost 3.5 years ago. We had a committee of Terry McEwen, Kirsten Wondrow, Ron May, Denise Johnson, Paula Marish, which was fine because this was under the health goal. So in April of 2016, we got a report from a committee that had looked at it. It wasn't the same committee. It was actually a group of different people. They listed the issues. There was no discussion of health at all. I had a pretty frank conversation with the superintendent at the time, who made it very clear that the administration, and I'm not quoting directly, but the gist of it was, they see this as kind of a hassle. They don't really want to do it. So that wasn't all that satisfactory to several members on the board. So 2016 goals. We have survey and hold focus groups conversations with staff, students, parents, and other community stakeholders to gain feedback on modifications to school start times and some other things. And so the idea was that we would have a group again that would look at this issue again, but in the context of we would actually gather some data. Now, 2016, we're into a different superintendent, and there was lots of stuff going on that year, as I think you can recall. But the fact is that never happened. So we went an entire year without actually doing the thing that was on the board goal. So 2018, fall 2017, we have a different superintendent. And this is the time, and we had a discussion about this, about let's actually do a survey. Around that time, we got information from the Seattle School District, which was a large district that was making this change. And, I actually contacted the superintendent at the Seattle School District. His assistant responded and gave us the survey that they used, including the data. We developed a survey not identical to that, but based on that. So we did that survey, and about a year ago, we actually got the results from that survey. And the survey gave people two clear options to say no. It's like the start times are either fine as they are, or the start times are probably not ideal, but it's basically too much of a problem to change them. We didn't give people a clear yes, so I looked at the number of people who said no, and it varied a little bit depending on the particular group, but it was about 20 to 25% of people said no. So, based on that, we decided to put together another committee. We met, we did surveys again, and we came out with a result where certainly parents and students were more in favor of this than not. So now here we are, 4 superintendents later, 3.5 years with a recommendation to do another committee to deal with this issue with an implementation in 2020. So I think that, we've studied this issue. We've sought input. It is unfortunate, in my view, that we didn't have more consensus in terms of the survey data with teachers. And this may sound condescending, but it is really not intended in that way. I think that if we make this move in 2019, based on the fact that this is good for kids, that I think we can bring the teachers along. And part of where I come from in that is, if you look at the comments from the teachers, and again, remember about 38% are there already, but there is a lot of, there's some lack of understanding. So one of the comments I saw several times was, kids, you make this time, kids, they're just going to stay up later. Well, that's simply not true if you look at the research. I can cite 4 studies now, 4 peer-reviewed empirical studies that actually show that if you move the start times back, kids actually do get more sleep. So some of it is just building that support and raising awareness about some of these issues. So, I think it's past time. I don't think we rushed this. I think we've taken our time and taken our time and taken our time, and now we have a recommendation that we'll delay this to 2020. You're going to have another group of kids, and we should be clear, there are high school kids who are struggling to stay awake in school, and that's impairing their learning. So, and in terms of a staggered start, let me add as an aside, if we could do 8:30 and 9, I would be good with that, because that's what the American Academy of Pediatricians and every major health organization in this country recommends. So I think it's, 4 superintendents and 3.5 years, we have now, in terms of both of those surveys, we have nearly 5,000 responses. I don't know what else we would need to do in terms of something that would be more deliberate. My concern is that if this gets pushed back until 2020, then it's going to get pushed back longer than that. So, there's a sign out there in the lobby, and it says, "Dear students, I trust you, I believe in you, you are cared for, you will be listened to, you are important, you will succeed." Well, the students have told us something, and I think the question is, are we going to listen to them? I think that, and I'll stop in a minute, one of the concerns I've had about this process is that we've done almost nothing to educate people and build awareness in the community. If you look at the school districts that have made this change, and there are many districts making this change, by the way. I mean, this is a juggernaut that is happening, and it's going to continue to happen. And there are districts very close to here, none in Kansas yet, who've made this change. Yes, there are issues that need to be dealt with, but all of those districts who've made the change have dealt with those issues. If you wanted to appoint a committee to look at, implementation and how can we get around some of the challenges of making this change, I think that I think that would actually be a good thing to do. But to have this process going on for 3.5 years, it'll be 4.5 years, and who knows how long it's going to be after that. If we believe as a district that research matters, I think we've got to do more than just pay lip service to that idea and to embrace that research. And the last thing I'll say is, certainly there is, maybe it's the last thing I'll say. So, if we'd made this change in 2016, this would now be the norm. And I don't think you'd have much controversy because I think, we're asking adults to make adjustments. We're asking adults to make adjustments to accommodate the circadian rhythms of our adolescents. So that will become the norm. When you start at a school, any school in the country, the world, your family makes an adjustment, right? If it's in Lawrence, if it's a elementary school that's 8 a.m. or 8:15 or 8:45, then families make adjustments. You go to the next level, and there are different considerations, but families make an adjustment. You go to the high schools, families make an adjustment. This is just something natural that we do. And if you look at the high school start time and the middle school start time, it's pretty similar. Not a whole lot of adjustment in terms of the time, but then you have a 9 a.m. Wednesday start, and that's an adjustment that families make. So I think we underestimate our people's ability to actually make adjustments, and then once they do, this will become the norm, and we'll have done something that's good for our kids. Because at the end of the day, this is about getting kids more sleep, and more sleep is a good thing.
I appreciate those comments and the amount of study and thought that's gone into this. And over break, I spent a good amount of time just really looking at the data to get an understanding of what's beyond the headlines, but really looking at the research. And one of the things that's most compelling to me is that we hear over and over and over again this question about how do we improve soft skills? How do we reduce anxiety and depression for students? How do we get at addressing mental health needs for kids? And there's strong research that indicates that kids, in fact, do get more sleep when you move back the start time for high school, and it does have an impact on overall emotional well-being. And for me, as someone that's done behavioral interventions, one of the first things that I look at when I'm working with a client is their sleep. this is something we all know. And so what I wanted to know, we as parents know that it has an impact on behavior. What I wanted to know was, if you move the start time back, does it really increase the amount of sleep that a kid gets? And it turns out that there's strong evidence that it in fact does. It adds 30 to 40 minutes of sleep to a kid's evening. It's why we see these comments about Wednesdays being stronger days for kids. So for me, the other thing that was really compelling about the research is looking even deeper. The kids that have the most benefit from this are kids from marginalized populations. So we see the most impact of a later start time for kids from low-income, marginalized populations, an increase in their ability to participate in school as it relates to reduction in truancy, and as it relates to emotional well-being, and as it relates to just participation in academia in general. So I was sort of soft on this when we started looking at this issue. I thought there's many things that we can do to have an impact on kids' mental health. After looking at the data and the surveys, I feel strongly that we are at a space now where we've studied it. The question now is, how do we make it work for Lawrence? And the people that know how we make it work for Lawrence are our administrators, our principals, and our teachers. And I would ask them to look at, what can we do to support you when we make this change?
So thank you both for your comments. I think that what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I would also say that 2 years ago and 3 years ago, as a full board, we were not ready to make this move. And last year, when we put this group together and said, study this, we did it with the intention that, we would really be ready to make this move if it came back that the community was supportive of it, which I do think overall the community has shown they're supportive of it. I agree with you that for some teachers, it's just a matter of change being scary and difficult and those things, but there are some legitimate concerns that they were listed that we need to be very mindful of. So I guess I would like to reframe. I feel like we've got this sort of conversation going where you're still trying to convince the rest of the board that we do it, and I don't really feel like that's necessary. I think all 7 of us believe that this is something we should do, and that going into a later start time is where this district is headed, but that this next fall might just be a little bit too soon for some of these other reasons, and I know you don't agree, but that is where I stand for a lot of reasons that were listed from those teachers and from things I've heard listening to administration discuss it. So I am supportive of us tweaking this recommendation to say that we want in the next 12 months to have a very well-developed plan for how we're going to stagger a later start time for August of 2020. But I would not be able to support doing it this fall.
Mm-hmm. So, and I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I do believe that, if this board can make a commitment that August 2020, make a commitment tonight that we are going to change start times, then I think, that gives people a framework to kind of work with. And, we still have 7 months before the start of school, so I do think there is time. But if we make the commitment tonight to make that change, then I would be good with that. And that would be fine. That would be acceptable. But, we have another year of kids not getting adequate sleep if we do that. But if we can do that, that's fine. I do want to talk a little bit about this notion of staggered starts, because that really wasn't what our purpose was in terms of this particular committee. And I think sometimes the staggered starts get into other issues that really don't have kids' sleep first and foremost. And if you look at, actually the numbers in terms of the survey are actually more impressive if you look at the people in terms of the support. If you look at the people who actually made a choice, one of those 3 choices that we offered, the support actually, you see the support goes up in terms of the percentages. If the staggered start, and again, 8:30 to 9, I would be great with, because that gets us to what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends. It provides, and kids' circadian rhythms are much more likely to be in sync at 8:30, then that's fine. But if we start getting to staggered starts that are not that, then we're getting away from the benefit of this. And so you'll have fewer kids getting the benefit. So if we, we make the commitment, this is going to change in August 2020. I do think that we should put together a different committee. I'm hesitant to talk about another committee that gets together, talks about implementation. What do we need to do to make this happen? What are the specific times? Is it an 8:39, staggered start? Maybe we split the difference and we go 8:45. But the districts, many of the districts that have actually made this change, that's what they do. They have an implementation committee. And that committee doesn't have to deal with, extending the school year. I think that's a great idea. I think there are a lot of people who won't think that's a great idea. So if we can do that, then we can really nail this down. And I think that kind of committee holds us accountable in terms of we all agree this is a good thing. Let's put this committee together and we can get guidance from other districts who've made the change, because every district that does this has the same challenges we do. So it's not, there's nothing unique. There are many things unique about Lawrence, but this is not one of them. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay, so if we were going to, are you looking for us to have a firm recommendation tonight, or could we tweak it and come back with a recommendation on our next meeting?
You can do whatever you choose. You can tweak it and come back, because now it just lies with you to tweak it and vote on it. We don't necessarily have, unless you were asking us for additional information, we wouldn't have anything else to add.
So that's what I would recommend, that we've collectively sort of nodded to the fact that we approve the general, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, flavor of the recommendation, that we want to start it in August 2020, and then we will tweak it so it has a little bit firmer language, and we'll bring that back to the board to have a more clear picture so that second committee could be put to work.
Which second committee are you talking about? Because I'm talking about a very different implementation. Okay. Okay.
So just some food for thought as we are preparing that language. I do think, given the conversation we just had with Kathy and the feedback that we've heard from the community about what their priorities are in terms of our budget and spending, however we write this recommendation, I would like for it to be flexible enough that it allows the board to have a realistic conversation about budget impacts as we look at accepting and implementing the recommendation. I'm certainly not in a space right now where I would be willing to commit to saying that I am going to prioritize this over some of the other things that the community has said that they think are important as well, like teacher salary and that sort of thing. Like I think it would be wise to be thinking about that in the language of how we draft the recommendation, because depending on what route staff recommends that we go, it could have a really big impact, or it could negatively, or it could have a really big savings, or we might be splitting the difference. But because we don't have all of that information available to us right now, I'd like to keep that in mind.
So if we move to an implementation committee, I would anticipate that the recommendation come back to us in a timely way, so that schedules could be changed. And, right now we're up against, even if one of the reasons it does make sense to do it for next year is we really just don't have time to ask the principals to do that at this point. But one of the, I would anticipate that part of the communication as it relates to implementation to the board will include budgetary considerations, and I did hear that there is an option for which we might have significant savings, which could be used towards things like contingency teachers, or could be used toward mental health staff, or meant to go to teacher compensation. So there are ways in which this could have a positive impact on budget. So certainly I would want that to be part of the implementation when the committee comes back to us with how they're going to implement it. I would want to understand what the budgetary impact is.
Okay. So Melissa and I in executive session will talk with the superintendent, and we will obviously talk with Dr. Stubblefield as well and tweak this recommendation so that at our next meeting we can look at it, and hopefully we'll have a better starting point for minor changes than kind of this overhaul that we're looking at now, and not doing that, not eating up any more time tonight to do that, since there is not a pressing need for the recommendation to be approved today. Does that sound good?
It does, but are we willing to make the statement tonight that we will make this change in 2020?
I feel like we've made that statement, but if you want to make it official, I do feel like that we're in the position where we want to move towards a later start time in some capacity at the next school cycle of 2020. I feel I can say that as a board member that I would support that. It sounds like you would as well, Kelly would as well. Are there others? Is there anyone that doesn't feel comfortable saying that?
I think I've been kind of the outlier on this issue. I don't disagree with the science or the fact that this is good for students, but I think that there are other considerations that have to be looked at before I'm willing to say absolutely 100% I'm going to vote to implement it in 2020, no matter what comes out of the further discussions about how this actually looks. So I am glad that, generally speaking, people looking at this said, yes, this is a positive benefit. This is something that we should consider doing. I think we're still in that, for me, it's, how does this actually look in implementing it, and what does that mean for other programs and things that we're doing with students before I'm.
But what I would say, Rick, if this is any consolation, this is much larger momentum than we had a year ago. Not just sitting here on the board, but also I think with staff being behind it and putting hours into it, and really recognizing that this is one way or another, if not next year, this is where this district is headed. I think we all know that. So what we want to do, and I know that's not the music you want to hear, but I do think we have made a tremendous amount of progress from 12 months ago on this issue.
And we've made a lot of progress in educating the community about this, because it is certainly, because we've had this community meeting, it has certainly gotten more coverage in the media and in conversations with parents and staff than it had at any point over the last few years that we've started the conversation.
And while I know it's been on your radar for the past 4 years, I don't think that it's been on 4+ board members' top agenda for the last 4 years. And I do think that you've got a lot of momentum behind you right now, which is really exciting, and we should be celebrating that.
Well, it's not behind me, it's behind the students, and I appreciate that. So I think that one of the things that makes me uncomfortable is when we ask the community for what they want to do, and they tell us, and then we don't do it. And we don't do it even though we know the science is actually supportive of this, and this is a good thing for kids. So if we can say we're going to do this in 2020, we're saying we're listening to the community, we want to work a few things out. I think that we can do. I appreciate the idea that we try to raise awareness, but I think we can do a much better job than we have. And part of it is just clearing up some misconceptions about this. I'm fine with
as we move forward.
And I will say, as superintendent, I'm not interested in assembling committees and meeting for over 6 months to waste people's time. It's clear that the committee has given us a recommendation, and now it's just up to us to determine what that will look like. Now, we can assemble a committee to look at class size. They can come back and say, class size is beneficial. However, we all know that's a budget implication. So with that, this definitely will be a budget implication. Now it's just what decisions will we make to ensure that we can implement this effectively. And I will say this, I definitely appreciate the committee for their work on this. And if there's a committee members are still in here, just wave your hand. Thank you so much for the work that you've done on this. But please know this is just one piece. Of course, we all know what the health benefits say of that. And then there are some benefits academically. What I struggled with, and I shared this with the team, was that for the most part, the studies that I've read talked about grades as being the academic benefits, which can be subjective sometimes. I was really looking for those national norm reference assessment kind of results. But the committee has given this board, this administration, a recommendation. Now, what will these next year for this implementation committee look like to ensure that we're able to make some academic gains? Now, there again, this is, as I mentioned, this is just one piece. Class, start time is not going to magically improve academics, but this is also an opportunity for us to really look at the way we do school. And I will tell you, when I came here and found out that high schools don't have advisory or seminar, I was floored. And so this is an opportunity for us to kind of look at all of this. You know, I use the example, I don't know much about cars, but I know every 36,000 miles I probably should get some new tires. But if I put some new tires on there and don't align it, I'll probably come back in 12,000 miles with some new. So this is an opportunity for us to really just take the vehicle in and get everything done to really benefit all of our students.
We do have one public comment on this issue, and I don't know if, I think it's Anthony Brixis. I don't know if you're still here, but please come up and share your thoughts with us. And I apologize if your handwriting was also difficult for me to read. Maybe it's me.
My handwriting's terrible. So I want to thank you for the time to comment. And I do really want to commend both the board and the committee for looking at an issue or just looking at things beyond the scope of what we normally do to try and make things better. And I think that really shows that we're striving for good things. Why I'm here tonight, and I have to tell you, I did not expect to be here at all. I ran across it in social media, and I'd heard about it before, and I saw some of the results. And so it was the first time I really got in that, and I know that is on me. I'm sure that there's been multiple opportunities for input and things like that, and I'm sure that it's on me that I missed those opportunities. I will tell you that as I read many of the comments and I saw the survey, I did not see a mandate by any means to change, and I saw a bunch of concerns, and we heard some concerns as well tonight from the students. So why I'm here is I had conversations with my own kids as we shuffle off to practice and making dinner, and both of them showed great concern because they're involved in a lot of things. And many of those things are directly after school. Some of them involve school, some of them don't, both athletic and academic. And they were extremely concerned that it would limit their opportunity to participate in some of those things. So I hope that you all take it into consideration for that. We've had a bunch of things about more sleep and better performance. I'm not going to argue that if you get more sleep that you have better performance, but what I would tell you is that it's my responsibility as a parent to make sure that my child gets sleep. I think we have some of these opportunities already. We have a virtual school. If you want to start late, you have the opportunity to take classes later. I don't want to go back over the hundreds of comments and the things that are said, but really some of those talks about participation in activities and the things that people are trying to do. I hope that as a school, and I think we are as we're looking at this, that we are striving for excellence and we're really looking at what can make us the best. I challenge you today to go home and Google, read, and find anywhere that says, please start at 9 a.m. to be the best. Most people say, I'm not talking about just schools, most people say get up early, take care of things, have multiple opportunities to get things done during the day. If you look at somebody who's successful, you read a success book, how to be better, it never starts with sleep in later. It does start with a lot of sleep. And I think that responsibility is on us. So as we talk about responsibilities and opportunities, I just want to remind that I believe it's this board's job to give opportunities, right? And I do hear some opportunities in that. I have changed my mind on this subject from when I walked in this door as I've listened to many people. So part of the opportunities I've heard are that our lower performing students, it may help them, and I'm in 100% support of that. I also want to ask, and I don't know if the board looked at, we heard from the student that a lot of our students are taking 0 hour. And so I want to make sure that if whatever those people's opportunities are, I want to make sure that we keep those opportunities as well. My biggest concern is not about the time of school that starts, it's about when it ends, and keeping those opportunities. I'm interested in a longer school year if that's what it takes. I'm interested in having multiple opportunities. And one thing I heard that you said emphatically is the students have told us something and we had to listen. This young man changed my mind. And he said that lots of people do it in the morning, lots of people do it in the afternoon, and we need to make sure that we have those opportunities. So I hope you listen to the student that spoke so wisely.
Thank you.
Jessica, I have one more thing I want to add. I don't want, as we move this process forward, to lose sight of the fact that my reading of this recommendation is that there are a lot of other things the committee really expects us to look at besides just moving the start time. And if we don't do that as part of the implementation process, if we aren't looking, then I think that we have done exactly what we said we're trying not to do, which is get a bunch of people together, make them meet, have them give us advice, and then ignore it.
I do think that a lot of those things, though, are going to naturally fall into our strategic planning process. So
I agree.
it's fortuitous timing for us to be kind of marrying those and running them in parallel with each other. Some of these things are going to just naturally fall into a larger strategic planning process anyway, whether or not we extend the school year, things like that. Those really are conversations that are, I would agree with Rick, outside of start time. In terms of whether or not we make that change. We can do those in a staggered way over a 3 to 5 year period. So I agree with you, but I think that we are in a good place right now to sort of not ignore those things, but just switch the group that's focusing on them a little bit.
But if I could comment, because I want to make clear that I think these things are important, and if there's a committee to look at those, that's fine, but an implementation committee is really a group that figures out, we're going to change the start times, what are the issues we need to deal with, what are the ways that we can mitigate some of the concerns. I do worry that if we start to put a lot of these other things in that committee, you're going to get a similar result.
I think we agree. I think we agree.
No,
we're gonna hone it in and make it a more clear.
And it sounds like,
charge.
I mean, and just to speak to what you said, that we are still going to continue as a district to have a conversation about seminar, about redesign. Right. We're just not having it within this
conversation.
Space.
Right. So, and we'll have a chance to debate this all over again in a couple weeks.
Exactly. Everyone should come back.
Tina, I hope you enjoy your time with us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work you did as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, on to the next. We have the Capital Improvement Plan with Kathy Johnson and Kyle Hayden.
I need to leave.
Oh, look at the light.
So before you start, Kathy and Kyle, I actually need to leave a little early, so this has nothing to do with you guys. No. I'll be watching it on the stream.
Yeah.
One with KU,
Yeah. From Allen Fieldhouse.
Kathy Johnson, Executive Director of Finance. So tonight we're going to do a report. My part is going to give you a little bit about the health of our capital outlay fund, a little information about that, a lot of what you've kind of seen, but just updated for current year. And then Kyle will share with you some history of expenditures we've done on our projects, both out of bond and capital, and what our list is that we're proposing that be part of the capital improvement plan for this year. You're not approving anything tonight. That'll, if nothing really changes out of today or between now and the next board meeting, that'll be something that'll just be on the consent agenda to go ahead and approve at that time. So we'll get started. Just a reminder that our capital improvement plan, we do this every year. It's a 4-year plan taking into account facilities, equipment, furniture. We look at safety and security, educational effectiveness, all those kinds of things that are capital. The plan is fluid. Things change mid-year. Buildings, need repair, or things surface that we didn't plan on. And so it has to be fluid to take that into account. Most of our construction does occur in the summer because we don't want kids in the buildings, so we want to make sure that we kind of time that well. And the board will always see final project bids with the capital improvement plan, present those to you for approval, because anything that's $20,000 or above either requires some bids or does require board approval for board policy purposes. So most of the things in here are going to come back to you in a single project to be approved. We do try to plan those, as I kind of mentioned, cost effectiveness and efficient manner. We do have to follow statutory requirements around bidding. During bond construction, a lot of times the district has been partnering those bond bids with capital improvement dollars to be able to get the most out of our money, because if you bid that in that bigger project, a lot of times it's cheaper than if we were to try to bid an isolated project by itself. So we always are looking at that. A little bit about our capital outlay fund as just a reminder. The sole source of resources for this fund is primarily your mill levy, the 8 mills that you approve as a mill levy. There can be some general fund transfer. There's not a limit. We have not, as a district, routinely ever done that. We need our general fund dollars where they are, and so we have not transferred general fund dollars into capital outlay for improvement kinds of things. They've been used in the operating fund. We've not done that. Miscellaneous income, sale of property, and reimbursements are legal revenues for this fund. The district passed a resolution for a maximum authority of 8 mills. We did it for perpetuity. That means we can levy the full 8 mills, or we can levy something less than that, but we don't ever have to go back and get permission for that mill levy. Ad valorem taxes and motor vehicle taxes are a result of that mill levy. So new revenue as a result of that 8 mills around our current assessed valuation is going to run about $9.8 million. So when you look at the plan, you're looking at new dollars that you can definitely spend or expect each year as a result of that mill levy. Sometimes you don't spend the prior year, so you have cash carryover. Sometimes you spend that cash carryover, you have less, to spend. But in general, you'll get new refresh of revenues. We do get a little bit of state aid. You can see that it went down. In 15-16, we were a no state aid district. Some of the legislative changes, we became a state aid district, but you can also see that we've already dropped down, and I would expect potentially we'll be a no state aid district again in the future. But for right now, just a teeny tiny bit is really what's coming in, comparatively speaking, to other districts that receive state aid in their capital outlay fund. This is just a snapshot of our mill levy and kind of what has happened with it. You can see that we publish at 8, and it usually rounds down a little bit. That's the way we want that to go. The assessed valuation is not certified until October. You have to publish that in July and August. We don't really want it to go the other way, because what that means is we're counting on dollars revenue from the 8, and if it stays 8, even when it's certified, that means that potentially we lost some revenue potential there. And so this is making sure that we're gaining all of that revenue potential. We don't want it to change very much, but we want it, we would rather see it go this way than the other way. So things that you can and can't spend out of this fund. It's very statutorily defined, and it is for acquisition, construction, reconstruction, remodeling, those things that you would consider capital, not consumable, not expendable. So things that you see on this ineligible list per the statute are pretty clear. Insurance, textbooks, fuel, things that we might call equipment for PE, balls, scooters, those are not considered equipment for purposes of capitalizing. If you think of the corporate world or the business world, it's things that you depreciate are typically things that you would capitalize or spend out of capital outlay. Things that you wouldn't, you'd just buy something new, is typically what would not be eligible. So things that are eligible are, boilers, parking lots, roofs, tractors, technology equipment, musical instruments, things like that. When we did our perpetuity mill levy in July 1 of 2015, we also encompassed some expanded permissions in the capital outlay fund, and some of those are on the right. So now there is some software potential that we could charge directly out of there. some upkeep of grounds. Another big one is performance uniforms, band uniforms, even athletic uniforms. They've considered those to be something that could come out of capital outlay. One that's considered there is some salaries of maintenance and custodial. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit as to why there's a reason to think about that somewhat on a restrictive basis because of cash flow. And we do it to a very small degree, but it's because a much larger degree really impacts cash flow and our ability to even pay them because of their routine expenditure, and our revenue does not come in routinely in this fund.
So, could I ask a quick question,
There's a
Kathy?
balance there.
Just because it comes up every year, I think, of what, if anything, are we maybe spending out of general fund that we could move into capital? Is there anything left, or have we really kind of cleaned that up at this point?
There are, but when you look at that for balancing purposes, again, looking at your cash flow, you really have to pay attention to how some of those ongoing costs that are monthly, and our cash flow does not come in that way. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. So you could get into October and you have routine expenditures, but you have no money to pay for them out of this fund because the resources don't come in a monthly basis. They come in a tax distribution basis, which is about 3 times a year. So that's problematic when you think about some.
And then when it comes in, we can't transfer it out to reimburse the general fund.
It creates problems because all of those funds that are levied funds, general fund, et cetera, are also tax distribution to some degree. So if you're transferring from a fund that's also getting tax revenue and it has the same restrictions of distributions, you're pulling from a fund that doesn't have the money anyway. So it becomes, and then the only option is contingency, and we've spent down our contingency to a point where we may not have that to pull because we're already pulling it down to a very low balance to help with cash flow in LOB. So there's a lot of balancing impacts. We do have some money that we're spending out of here that would fall into this category for all of our trades. So basically all of our trades, our electricians, our plumbers, those kinds of people are coming out of this fund already, and we've moved that over here.
Thank you.
Cash balances, we'll talk a little bit about this. So tax money doesn't come in regularly. It comes in very 3 times a year, basically. So what's important to remember is that the cash balance you see July 1 has to pay for everything up until December 19th. We don't get any new money again to be able to pay for things until December 19th. Well, there's a lot happens. We just talked about that in the summer. That's when we do things in our capital outlay plan from between those months. And so it's really important that we have to look at that holistically and how that looks. So what I've tried to do is try to monitor where our lows end up, where our highs have ended up, what our averages have been, and to keep in mind that if something happens unexpectedly, say the roof needs to be replaced and we didn't plan for that, and it's $1 million, you're running into a pickle really, really, really fast. So all of that has to be taken into account to truly be fiscally responsible for our buildings and make sure things are in the right place. So just looking at a 5-year little kind of snapshot, our average on December 19th, which is right before our tax distribution comes to us, our unencumbered cash on average over the past 5 years has been about 2.2. The high was 5.2. We were as low as $74,000 on December 19th of 16. That is a very scary number for a district our size. And we were down to 442 in December 19 of 2017. This year it was not as low, but that's because we've just recently started the 2017 bond issue and 18 bond issue, and our focus has been bond construction and not so much out of this fund. So it's a much more comfortable level. But you know, if something would have happened in those late months in 2016 or 17, we would have been waiting till revenues came in to be able to do something, because that also is our lowest point in our LOB. Same type of revenue flow happens in our local option budget, which is the supplemental general fund. So, and the same with the 20 mills in general fund. So cash flow is always something we have to keep in mind. Our July 1 balance is always going to be the highest in this fund. Always going to be a high number. This fund and bond and interest will always have the highest cash balance, except for the January 20th tax distribution. This is going to be because it's got to pay for everything to December. So this year it was higher than the normal, which was, it was 6.3 million. And again, that's related to the bond construction. Over the last 5 years, between July 1 and December 19th Our average expenditures are $4.3 million. So, knowing that, ideally, 4 to 4.5 should be that target for July 1 in order to know that $4.3 million is likely going to get spent between July 1 and December 19th. We've been able to do that pretty well. This year it's higher than normal, but a year ago is about that number. So this is just kind of giving you a snapshot. We have to keep all of that in mind, cash flow. Although we give this laundry list of projects, we also have to time those projects in a way that we actually have revenue to pay for them. So that's all part of that. So the cash flow is very important, and that's why I mentioned that. And I don't know if you have any questions. It's because a lot of numbers there, and there's a lot of information there. But that's just kind of giving you a snapshot of why, when we talk about July 1 balances, they're important. Tax revenues, resources, and cash flow is really just it's a challenge sometimes. Questions? No?
I had a question, editorial comment. When we're talking to people in the community about cash balances, I think it's really important to point out, because legislators get this wrong all the time, don't look at the July 1 cash balance as an indicator of how much carryover there is in our budgets. You have to look at that. December 1st would probably be, or December 18th would apparently be.
We're unique, because our county has given a special distribution on December 20th that most counties do not do.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them, it's January 20th.
Right.
So we actually are getting 10% of our January 20th distribution a month early. And that's unique to Douglas County. So if you were in a different county, they're not getting that. So they're having to go clear to January 19th to be able to fund the cash flow for this. So we are actually special and that we have that special distribution that we have gotten approved by the county for
With everything that's happened over the past couple of years with the state, are they ever late with giving us those July payments, those tax distributions?
So the tax distribution and capital outlay come directly from the county.
Okay.
The tax distribution on the 20 mills in general fund comes through as state aid, but it's the only one that does.
Okay.
So we don't have to worry about the state being late. We just have to worry about the county being late, and they haven't been so far. As long as people pay their taxes on time, we get our distribution. So if the delinquency were to go up, then that might impact us. So expenditures, when you look at 12 months, the average over the past 5 years has run about $12.5 million. Our high was $14 million, and our low was 10. Our average, like I said, was the 12.5, and what the plan you'll see this year is proposed at 11.5. It's a little higher than what some of our previous plans have been, but our cash balance supports that because we haven't done so much in a couple of the previous school year due to some bond construction taking place first. So this just gives you a kind of a cross spectrum of that different funds or different years and what the cash balance has done. You know, our mill levy amount, we shared that on a different slide, our cash balance, our taxes coming in, total resources, expenditures, and then ending balance, and that carries over, just kind of takes yourself across. This, we've said that is kind of where we would say is our target-ish amount based on our averages. This was a little bit higher. When we publish, this is having to publish high because we don't know whether we're going to have resources or not, but if I don't publish 15 million and I end up with resources that could support something, say we sell a piece of property and I only budget 10 million, I can't spend more than 10 million and I cannot republish this fund. It's a levied fund. So I have to publish high enough for unanticipated resources in order to actually be able to spend those resources if they're available. If the resources aren't in, I'm not going to spend the money. But I have the flexibility to spend it if it does come in. And that's that publication of high. Not that we're going to plan for it, which is the next column in green. We're not going to plan to spend down to $750,000 because I just told you that if I do that, I'm in a real pickle for cash flow. And we're not doing a whole lot from July to December. So we're going to still plan for what would be the norm, which is the next column in green. And so the resources are somewhat the same, but yet you're going to see that our proposal is about 11.5. That does drop our cash a little bit. You can kind of see what the proposal for the next few years are in the plan that we're going to share, and that balance kind of drifts back down to that $4 million mark. It's a fluid document. Those things are going to change. We're going to bring them back to you. We're going to take things off. We're going to add things back. Those are things that just happen because roofs roofs get holes and HVACs break and we need equipment, you know, because they changed the requirements for CASHA and we need all new javelins. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen that are unknowns. So it has to be fluid for that purpose, but we also have to plan forward thinking. Otherwise, we lose sight of what might be due in the next couple of years.
So I had a community member provide feedback a few months back and outlined how you could republish a budget. Could you tell me, is that
republish a budget if it's not a levied fund?
If it's not a levied fund?
Publish a levied fund because I have no alternate resource of revenue, and that's a statute. Okay. I can republish a fund that is not a levied fund like this.
Okay, thank you.
General fund, although a levied fund, it can be republished because there's a statutory allowance to do that.
In your example, if you had published at 10 and we sold the property and got the 15, the extra 5, does the 5 then just carry over as cash balance for next year?
It just goes into cash balance, and the next year you can publish it much higher.
Okay.
And deal with it, yeah. So in the year, there are certain levied funds that just statutorily can't be republished. You can republish certain funds. General fund is one of them, but a capital outlay fund would not be one that they would allow us to republish.
Okay, thank you.
And the state will tell you, the state finance office will tell you to publish high in order to keep yourself from getting into pickle. Any questions related? So the next little bit is going to be Kyle's, and he's going to kind of link into some history on our webpage and then link into the plan itself. So I'm going to turn it over to Kyle.
Thank you.
Hey, Kyle Hayden, Chief Operations Officer. Going to ask you to bear with me just a little bit. We're going to take a quick walk down memory lane because it leads back to a couple key topics that I want to talk about, and one in particular is this facility. So on our webpage, if you haven't seen this, we keep a chronicle really that goes all the way back to 2013 bond issue. And so it highlights all the different projects we've done for really the last 6 years. Just to give you a quick reminder of what that looked like, back in April of 2013, the community passed a bond issue that really focused a lot on our elementary schools, but it touched every single school. And so, and that's kind of a key element of this. But a big chunk of dollars went towards addressing our excellence and equity goals, in particular looking at the Central and East Lawrence elementary schools. Those projects were complete in 2017, just prior to the board approving the other bond. Exit out of this. The 2017 bond, which we're currently, we've completed 3 projects. We're in the midst of one, and we have 3 more scheduled to start this spring. And so the goal on this one was to mainly focus on our secondary schools. So, like I said, there's a lot of information on that web page, but the key point to all of that is that we've made significant investments in all of our schools, or 20 schools, along with built the College and Career Center. In addition to that, though, if you remember over the course of the last couple of years and what the board approved last year with the capital improvement plan, we made some significant improvements to Wakarusa Valley. And then we also made improvements to East Heights as it served as a staging area for elementary schools as we were going through those projects. So, and in particular now, remember, East Heights now houses our CTRAN program, Adult Special Education, that we moved from Holcomb. The Culinary Arts Kitchen has moved from Holcomb out to the new College and Career Center, as that was part of the 2017 bond also, or a piece of it. The Tiny K program and Parents as Teachers have both moved to East Heights out of Centennial School. Okay, so all those different things I wanted to touch on to lead into the plan, which has a couple key elements that relate to that. So, in highlighted red are 2 key things. One is the improvements to our secondary schools that were items that were captured by the design committee after the bond issue was passed. So when I began working with the design committee, the architects and construction teams sat down with them, other items come to light. And some of those things you'll see up here, and the bond dollars just haven't been able to support those to this point. Now, I will say that our bond funds have gone above and beyond what the master plan scope had identified. So we've been fortunate to capture more scope along the way on every single project. When you approve Lawrence High School here in a couple of weeks, the bids come in, you'll also have you'll see some additional items that we captured on that project also. And then the other thing you'll see as you scroll through here is two projects or two sites, one Centennial, which I mentioned earlier, and the other one, the Education Center, this facility right here. So I'm not going to go down and through this entire list, but I did want to point out those two things because there's some large funds associated with it. So earlier this fall, we did an assessment of Centennial School. And one of the reasons we did that assessment is because we knew we had some deferred maintenance that was sitting out there, and I mentioned it was one of the schools that we really hadn't done a lot with. Per that assessment, which was a professional assessment done by Gould Evans Architects and McCown Gordon Construction and Henderson Engineers, the team that's been working with us a lot on all of our projects, our current projects, they came in and identified $3.5 million worth of work. And the $3.5 million worth of work would make sense because if you go back to a lot of our elementary school projects, there are elementary schools that were that size. New York would be a perfect example. That gets in the range of the budget that it would have costed us to do that project without an addition. So when you look at Centennial School, that made sense. Now, that being said, we feel like you could scale that back and maybe to half that number or a little less than half that number if there were some things that you didn't strategically do. Like, let's say you didn't replace all the ceiling grid. Let's say you didn't do all the lighting and we stayed with just a regular fluorescent light instead of going to LED lights. Well, there's some big expenditures, big cost items like that you could maybe hold off on. But that being said, it's a significant investment in that school. The reason why we looked at that school, though, is also because Dr. Stubblefield has been working on a potential plan to move programs, the remaining programs, out of that school and take them to Peasley Tech and the College and Career Center. I believe you know a little bit about that already, but so that plan is in progress. If that were to happen, these improvements wouldn't need to take place. The minimum one potentially...
So Kyle, can I ask a question real quick?
Yep.
And I may have missed it when you first started on this. What's the difference between the red and the black?
So the red is the secondary school improvements
Okay.
that were identified, and then also Centennial and this site.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
Okay. So I went ahead and put those improvements all the way on the far right-hand column, but they are going to be reflected in the bottom. So the second one I wanted to talk about was this building. At the same time that we were doing an assessment of Centennial, we also did an assessment of this facility. And some of you may have noticed that this building on the exterior is crumbling. And there's been several pieces. One is right outside on this entrance that has fallen off. On the east side of the HR building is another piece that is crumbled. Through that assessment, though, we found that the veneer, the exterior veneer is failing. There's moisture that has penetrated it over time, and it needs a full replacement. For that to be fully replaced, it comes in an estimate of about $2.3 million. We would come back with a panel system, a metal panel system. It's really one of the most cost-efficient ways you could address it, and it would be one of the most durable things you could do to prolong the life of this facility. Also, some interior improvements were analyzed, and one in particular is now that the IRC is gone from this space, it's a nice space, large and open space, but for it to be really fully functional as really a true conference center for professional learning, there's a lot of work that would need to be done to that, including building some walls, maybe having a partition to divide the space up, but it really could be a fabulous space. To do that, though, it's a significant investment because once you get in there and start building walls, you need to address the mechanical electrical things. And then there's just a lot of what I would call deferred maintenance on this building, especially in the MEP area, that would need to be addressed. To do those improvements in a turnkey method, you'd have $1.7 million worth of interior work too. So total project of approximately $4 million. When you see that balance reflected at the bottom of this, we've reflected it in two ways. One was go ahead and putting them in as just doing the $2.3 million worth of work in 1 year, and then the next year doing the interior work, the $1.7 million of interior work. The other way it was reflected was in approaching it with a capital lease. Now, a capital lease, to remind you, is something we've done, that what we did on the facilities and operations complex in order to remodel the buildings we had there, build the warehouse, and build the new facilities and operations offices. We entered into a capital lease. It was a 10-year capital lease that we were able to make payments on what ended up being a little bit over a $4.5 million project. So Kathy's been in contact with our bond counsel and also our George K. Baum, who helps us with sale of bonds, helps us with capital lease items, things of that nature, and the estimate would be around a $500,000 payment over a 10-year period. Interest rates are still around 3%, 3.25 depending on the approach you take, but that would be an option for the district to manage this type of a project, the scope of this project, more in a turnkey way, and instead of trying to piecemealing it together. So also when you look at the bottom line, it does get the capital outlay or this capital improvement plan in budget, whereas trying to do big chunks of the other does not. You exceed the budget. And then it just comes down to choices. The other things I want to point out, roofing is still a big ticket item on here. For this next year, we're anticipating doing about $1 million worth of roofing work. The year after, $1.25 million worth of roof. The technology leases also take up a pretty good chunk of change. If you look through those leases, right now we have $2.6 million in technology leases. Obviously, that's not a bad thing, given it's an investment in our classrooms, but it is, as Kathy would like to say, we're lease poor in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of debt out there. It's going towards a good thing. All of our devices are on 4-year leases, and we roll them over. One of the things that happens too is when the life of the devices is up, we trade them in, and so we have some value added when we go to the next lease. A case in point would be the middle schools. The 2016 lease on the middle school iPads was $802,000. We anticipate that being cut in half for next year. So, like I said, I'm not going to go through the whole list. You can see what's on there. If you have questions about any of those items, please ask. It's not up for board approval tonight, like Kathy said. This is more about just getting it in front of you and getting a big picture. Also, she said, none of the items on here, even though the board would approve the capital improvement plan, items above $20,000 still come back to you for a second look. So even if a decision is made about this building or Centennial or whatever, as far as how it looks in the capital improvement plan, we still have to come back to you with more defined projects. So.
What's the projected use of Centennial once the current programs are moved out? I mean, if we do this work, then what happens to the building?
Good question. So for the next 2 years, McCown Gordon is going to use a portion of the building as their construction offices for the Lawrence High project. So because it's such a huge project, it takes more than just one single wide trailer, job site trailer that you would typically see, because they're going to have meetings that sometimes will include 50 people. And so they're going to use a couple classrooms just for offices, and then a couple classrooms for meeting rooms. That'll probably be on the far west end of the building, so that they're just coming in that access point. If you didn't know this already, the gymnasium has indoor batting cages for Lawrence High baseball and softball, and so those are really used throughout the entire school year. We do rent those out too, to outside user groups who come in and use them. We made that change a couple years ago because they were lacking some gym space to be able to accomplish that. So beyond that, I think that's up for further discussion.
Okay. And Kyle, you mentioned that Dr. Stubblefield is working on a plan to move the adult ed programs out there, and does that also include Native American Student Services? Or has that already moved?
I don't think it's moved.
I don't think it's not yet,
but it's in process.
But it's in process,
Yeah,
and so we're thinking about combining all of those remaining programs at Peaslee and the College and Career Center.
Yeah, so the Native American Student Services will go in the College and Career Center. That's already been determined. Adult education diploma completion would go into Peaslee Tech. Those conversations have already started too. When you think about it, there's a lot of synergy around that. It makes sense having our adult learners out there, with those opportunities right in their doorstep. So. The idea for a transition for NAS, I think, is sometime this spring. Transition for adult ed diploma completion would be next August.
Any other questions for Kyle or Kathy?
I just have a question. As long as we brought up NAS, one of the things that I've attended a couple of their most recent meetings, and one of the things that came up there, and we talked to Jennifer about, I think when she was in front of the board most recently, was if after a year of being there they determined it was too challenging for their families to get there due to transportation, or it wasn't a good fit for the program in general. What's the review process to make sure that just for that specific program, the other programs make complete sense to me, but just thinking about, and I know there's the Boys and Girls Club are there as well, but thinking about a home, if that's the right home for them, how do we evaluate that?
He's going to have to help me with that one. So Dr. Lewis or Dr. Stubblefield.
And as Dr. Stubblefield comes, some of those same questions were considered before we even entertained the idea of moving them out there, potentially about families getting out there.
Yeah. So one, we could survey and have conversation with the parents, but one of the things that in talking with just some different students in Boys and Girls Club with the Teen Center being there, it provided a lot more options for the Native American students. Right now, they have to choose whether they go to NAS or Boys and Girls Club because they're in two different locations. That was not the only reason that, it makes sense to put it in a newer maintained facility, but it did provide access. One of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years and being on the Boys and Girls Club board is that in other states and places where they do have a Native American Student Service, they have a stronger partnership with Boys and Girls Club to leverage some of the things that they can offer to provide more support to the students.
It all makes really good sense to me. I just wondered about the review, what the intention was to check in and make sure it was still working.
We can look at like the attendance and those types of things this year and compare it to next year to see if there's a dip or increase and explore some of the why around that.
Okay, thanks.
Kyle, what's the, what do you need feedback from the board on the choice between the lease finance versus not lease financing the improvements to this building that need to happen?
Yeah, absolutely.
So being on the committee, I've heard more about this than other board members, so I'll just throw out there that I feel like the lease finance option is the better way to approach it from a budget and cash flow perspective with our plan. I know Kyle mentioned that we have a lot of leases. On the other hand, the magnitude of the work that has to take place at this building is really large, and I would hate, I don't want to see us have to put off projects that are more visible to our students and our families in order to do this work. At the same time, from what I have heard of the assessment that was done on this building, that work absolutely has to happen, and it has to happen soon, because otherwise we'll be facing even more significant difficulties with this building. And so that's, for what it's worth, that's my 2 cents.
And so I'm assuming you'll come back with more detailed information about that when you do want us to vote on it or make some sort of motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Suggesting that we go the lease route.
Okay.
And so when you look at how we presented the proposed budget and the cash flow, it was
With the lease, with the lease, okay.
the least much.
That's
So
helpful.
I should say that. That would be our suggestion if we're going to do as outlined, that we would direct it as a lease so that we just.
Okay.
We would come back, the amended version for the 28th would show just the one option on this.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you both. Appreciate it. Okay. I think we have reached the end of our meeting.
Move to adjourn.
Jeez.
Second. It wasn't our student that's so fast. You want to second it? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.